All right, that's really frustrating that that killed the stream. Um, that was the thing I was trying to avoid doing, but it does seem like we're better off. So hopefully, I haven't lost too many of you. The Orchid Transfigurations, Noon, the third volume of a compilation of quasi-Rosicrucian allegories, supposedly by Robert Flood. This is in the original Latin. A long dialogue between the Mountain Mother and the Vigilant Storm describes the ways in which both mountains and storms end, and the protections they use against those ends. But we must use the knife, said the lion-throned one, the noose, the flame, the waking word, against those who have passed the three-valve door, and so none may pass. That is our law, and the law of the sun. Solace, peace after trouble. Unhatched hymns, hymns attributed to St. Lucia the Eyeless, patron of glassworkers and name of the hour called Menascate. The hymns venerate every sanctioned hour, celebrating them as the sun undivided, but also suggesting that each hour may become the next. Madrigad to watchman, watchman to wolf, and so on. The hymn of the phases celebrates the Menascate, from whom we do not turn, for the truth which is beauty, the beauty which is truth, and the perfect balance between the two. The hymn of the Reflections, more puzzlingly, celebrates the Menascate as the sister of Janus, mother of Shadow, whose visage wondrous in emptiness can reveal all truths. Okay, so I got another welcome to the chat room message, which disturbs me. Okay, but it's working, so I always learn to mistrust the welcome to the chat room sign. Those who do not sleep. The mystic Broadnax discusses the origins of the Sister and Witch and of the Thunderskin. The Sister and Witch were born in two wombs, one poor, one rich, across the sea. The Sister was stronger in the aspect of heart, and so their survival was assured. The Witch was stronger in the aspect of Grail, and so they were not satisfied. When the Sister and Witch came west, the Red Grail permitted their ascension, but then grew jealous of their power. It lured a great musician into the ranks of its names and caused him to be reborn from blood as a heart hour, so that the Grail might maintain dominion there also, but its victory is not assured. I always thought this one was kind of interesting because it gives a very different account. So when you hear might be reborn from blood as a heart hour, this is a reference to the Thunderskin, but of course all of the other references are not... lured him, a great musician, into the ranks of its name and caused him to be reborn as a heart hour. This is quite a very different characterization than saying that the Thunderskin was sort of offered as a sacrifice to appease the Horned Axe for the destruction of the other gods from stone. So this is one I always found kind of interesting just because, I don't know, this isn't, I feel like this is a reasonably well-known film, but it's one that's still kind of obscure for a reference. But like Rashomon is a really interesting movie because it tells the same story from a number of different perspectives. And it's, it's Akira Kurosawa, so it's obviously a wonderful movie, and it's, it uses a lot of really interesting techniques, both in terms of storytelling and cinematography, that I feel it's one that probably could still be studied today and really appreciated as innovative in how it tells its story. But it is one of these ones that has always made me appreciate any kind of story that's told from a few different unreliable perspectives. There's actually another movie called Hero that did an interesting job with that too. But the way that Hero handled it was, I think there are a few different versions of the same legend. And so it accounted for those differences through a few different tellings. And there's actually a few different, there's some shots which allow for slight different and specifically contradictory endings, or not endings, but like contradictory events. Because it's a film and it's a mainstream film, it does make a determination. But if you know sort of I don't want to say the controversy, but if you know the differences between those two tellings, or sometimes other tellings, more than two, there's a shot which sort of is one version and then it goes to the next one to sort of settle the dispute between the two, which I always thought was a very interesting technique. So sorry, just give me one more second here. All right. So again, we're overloaded on the Grail and Sky now, but that's not exactly a hardship. The Morphic Codex, a priestess of the Sisterhood of the Knot, claims to have discerned the true meaning of the Thunderskin's birth. The writer credits the Red Grail, the Ring Yew, and the Horned Axe, the powers the Sisterhood reveres, with agreeing a final treaty between the Hours of the House and the Hours they displaced. The Thunderskin loved the Yew, and the Grail destroyed him as restitution for the slaying of the Horned Axe's sisters and brothers. The Thunderskin entered the Mansis through the Peacock Door, a privilege never given to the witch and sister, but then their merit was much less. The writer admits that entry through the Peacock Door is unseemly, but insists that under the circumstances there was no other way. And finally, The Turquoise Hand, a calligraphic manual of Ramsund which employs as exemplar text Farid Udin's Conference of the Birds. At noon, the sun moves like the beating of a wing. At sunset, he sends the herald child with her candle. At midnight, he sends the wind that extinguishes the candle flame. Commentary, illustrations, and interleavings carry revelations never intended in the original, a sense of history and the senses of histories. That old lost music, in the right histories every song ever sung still lingers in wind and echo, untouched by the demands of eternity. Any librarian can use this to establish a history and complete the game, but the Symergist and the Magnate can win a particular victory. So this is one of the endings that I can possibly go for. I'm currently deciding between... let me just double check the endings that I was looking for. So it was Sky and Rose, I believe, that I was debating between. And then Winter and Scale are the two deciding factors between that old lost music and the final understanding. Also, as a quick note, let me see if I can find the weight of this thing. Just give me a second here. This is partly inspired by Book of Hours, and I specifically think of this because of that old lost music. It's not just because of Book of Hours, but it definitely pushed me over the edge. I have over 12.5 kilograms of music that I just ordered and came in yesterday. That's going to keep me busy for a while. Yeah, that is an unreasonable number. It's cheaper if you buy in bulk. So in fairness, it's not just music. So it's divided in a few cases. So there's sort of technical sides. No, like sheet music, like to play the piano. So it is divided in a few different. There's a few different documents. So there's sort of more very standard technical things, because like I really do want to get back to fundamentals. I did do piano lessons as a kid, but it's actually been quite a while since I've formally studied it. I've always had an interest, and like I really like synthesizers. So it would be wrong to say that I've not used that knowledge at various points through my life. But I think there's a difference between sort of tooling away at a keyboard. I mean, like you can even pick up a guitar and sort of plink away, and you're not going to be great, but like you can, without training, like make sounds and produce something that you are happy with. I don't mean to suggest that is a instantaneous or even an advisable path, but like you not everybody needs to sit down and have lessons. But what I do tend to find is that I work quite well with structure. Also, what interests me is older stuff. Like I love jazz, but you love it when new System Shock lore. You didn't know this? Oh, that's really interesting. But yeah, I tend to do well. So like even with writing, right? Like I definitely enjoy pushing the limits. I actually got to kind of talk about this in a writers group that I'm in. And it's actually kind of funny because I remember when I was talking with, it was a blog that I'd actually put up. Oh, that's cool, Mr. Nuclear Mon. Is there a specific instrument that you're interested in, or just like when you commented on vinyl, is it more you're just increasing your music appreciation? But I remember there were a couple of people who said this is novelty for novelty's sake, and it's funny. Like it didn't exactly hurt me, but it's one of those ones where I'm like, oh, that doesn't feel good, because it's actually something that I take some pains to avoid. I really don't like, no, it's a little bit like contrarianism, right? Where I think being contrarian can be very interesting, but I never want that to be something that happens as a reflex, right? Very often I will actually find that I dislike people who do devil's advocate, not because I don't, avocatus diaboli is a wonderful position. However, I do sometimes find that it can be a little bit of a shield for someone saying something that they really think, but who doesn't want to sort of stand up for their convictions. And so I kind of prefer it when people come out and say it. So there's nothing wrong with devil's advocate, but obviously there's the cowardly devil's advocate, and then there's something to actually provoke thought, and the latter is the one that you often want. Okay, yeah, that's neat. I really like electronic music, and obviously my two loves of classical and electronic are combined in Wendy Carlos's music, like Switched On Bach and stuff like that. But anyways, so I do, in terms of like writing, there's a lot of cases. So the reason why I point that out in the writers group is that what was interesting is the most recent thing that I showed, people really liked. And then as a couple of follow-ups in some of the discussions, some people brought up some things. I said, it's like, well, I'm actually kind of glad you mentioned this because, and then I shared a couple of other ideas that they had, and they seemed really interested. And those would probably be, I'd say, avant-garde, which I probably shouldn't be working in because I really need to get good at writing on its own. But the funny thing is, as much as I enjoy and as much as I think it's important to try and push out the frontier as much as you can, and when I say push out the frontier, I'm really just thinking of your own skill, right? And I often find a really good way of doing that is, write the unthinkable, and sometimes the unthinkable will be, I could never do something like that. But sometimes it also means thinking, I shouldn't do something like that. And that's really the time you should say, oh, no, you're going to do that. But the funny thing is that while these have often been drivers for me to do things that I personally find interesting, and I'm hoping other people do, I very often find that I work well with structure. So when learning other languages, I really find it helpful to learn grammar. And I've actually often found that I sometimes spend too much time on English fundamentals because sometimes there'll be, a specific grammatical term that I forget or I misapply. And I need to kind of turn back. And again, sometimes this isn't helpful because I spend too much time swimming in the realm of, of the terminology. But like to a certain extent, mapping out sentences and, being able to point to the different parts and why they all work together is something that I still find useful because it gives me a framework in which to analyze both my own work and others. And I sort of appreciate that it's not necessarily the sentence structure that makes, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy hilarious. But they are sort of the words are the ammunition, and there are definitely ways that you can structure sentences, particularly for humor, right? Because the punchline is so important. And if you know how to craft a sentence well, you can actually place that punchline at the point of maximum impact. And you can't rely on that in every language. So one of the best compliments I ever got on my French was that I'm actually apparently quite funny in French. So so they said, it's like, you know it better than you do. It's hard to be funny in French. And I'm like, yeah, I'll take the compliment. I'm still not good at French though. But yeah, so all of that to say, I do find that when it comes to studying music, I do actually work well within the confines of formal lessons. So there's one part which is very much focused on technique, so finger placement when you're doing a scale. I think the one thing I remember was, never touch the black notes with your thumb. Your thumbs will fall off if you touch a black note with the thumb. But I sometimes do it, but I find that my hands are going into awkward positions. I don't quite have the muscle memory to sort of avoid that. So some really fundamental material just to get those fingerings down again. Definitely music theory. I really like, one of the things I want to try and figure out is Schoenberg, who's kind of like this final boss of modern music. And it's weird because you actually can see his style of music working really well in like Warner Brothers cartoon, like Looney Tunes sort of stuff. And yet it's hard to listen to. Although it has also occurred to me that I think Schoenberg is the sort of stuff that you probably like. I kind of feel bad for people who make music today, because very often that music is designed for something. I am going to get back to the game though, but I wanted to talk about this music thing because it is something in real life that this game inspired. If you think about it, so much music that we listen to is a companion to something we're doing, right? You listen to music as you go for a walk. You listen to music as you watch a movie, right? The score is something that will work alongside the images, right? So this is what Wagner was talking about with the Gestmenste Kunstwerk or something like that, the total artwork. If you watch old movies, right? I'm thinking of stuff that takes place in like the 70s or that, but even like more modern movies that are about that period. So like Almost Famous and things like that. Like there are scenes where characters will go into their room and they'll put a record on the record player and like just listen to the music. And I've never experienced that. Like it actually took, well, sorry, I can't say I've never experienced that because I got a nice pair of headphones and I actually, I have Apple Music Classical. So I actually specifically went down and I put the headphones on and listened to Glenn Gould, and that was wonderful. But like that's something I actually had to do because I was trying to figure out what the deal was with that. And I think a lot of people don't actually sit down and just listen to music. And once upon a time, that's what people like. Presumably, that's what you do with the Beatles. So, anyways, I think one of the reasons why I struggle with Schoenberg is that it's definitely a very different style of music, and I imagine it is something that is intended to be listened to with focus, as opposed to something that I listen to kind of casually. It's actually something I've generally tried to do. So even like reading and stuff like that, I don't do a lot of audiobooks because I want to actually put the focus on the book I'm listening to. And I don't have a podcast on when I read. I'll sometimes have music on, but sometimes I'll just listen. So anyways, so I have a few goals that I'm trying to do with this. So one of these is just technical competence, putting the fingers in the right place, doing the work, and like it's like learning grammar. Nobody gets excited about it, but it's important. or, I don't find it wrong to brush my teeth, but, kids need to be convinced to brush their teeth sometimes, or eat their vegetables or whatever. The next part is music theory. And I really want to get into music. Like that to me is kind of the exciting part, right? It's like, how does music work? And this is something that, all the way back to like Plato and Pythagoras, they've been trying to work this stuff out. So that I find quite exciting, and I find that interesting. But if I stay entirely in the realm of theory, in the realm of Lantern, I'm not going to make music, which is of course something I want to do. I do have a keyboard, and I want to use that instrument as well as I can. So then the next batch is etudes. So these are specific piano studies which are designed to train you. So they are pieces of music. I think Chopin's probably really well known for his etudes. I am not trying that out the gate. I know better than to try that sort of stuff. But these would specifically be compositions. They are intended to sound like music, but they are specifically designed to accomplish a specific thing. So you can kind of see that as the bridge between pure technical work, where I'm just doing my scales and trying to figure out how all that works, and doing things that sound almost like performances, but are have a specific mind to practice. And then of course there's the repertoire, right? There's the just works of music that are enjoyable. So that's why it's a couple of kilograms of music there, and it's at varying levels. Like I have several years of work basically that I'm gonna do with that. And there's some history in there as well. I'm not going to touch the history stuff until like I have really, really solid foundations, but I have some ambitions. So, but yeah, part of that is one of the things that really delighted me about this game was the inclusion of music, because, and I've said this a few times before, like Cultist Simulator is really interesting because you have these threads that you pull, and you have, this secret world that's going on behind, and you're given a little bit of a glimpse, and you have to figure out what that means. And figuring out what that means often means reading other books, and sometimes reading multiple books allows you to gain a new perspective of these things. But what I like about Book of Hours is that it's expanded that understanding even further. So the skills that you have can be related to music. And again, like I said, these are things, the Pythagoreans wanted to understand the world. They understood the world through number and ideas of harmony. In fact, there's the branches of the Pythagoreans that later turned out, right? The Mathematikoi and the Acousmatikoi, right? And the Acousmatikoi, you can see that's a musical term, right? They're acoustics. And the apocryphal story of Pythagoras walking by the smiths and hearing, the hammers banging at different ratios, and sort of understanding that that's how tones are made. And then, if you read Republic, there's Plato's thoughts on music and the role in terms of the ordering of the soul and the proper balanced life. And then you can even think of figures like Hildegard von Bingen, who, in addition to being a very educated, learned individual and a Neoplatonist, did in fact produce quite a few pieces of classical music. I was actually listening to that just before the stream. And so you can actually see music and, I don't want to say the occult, but a lot of things that have informed a lot of what would later become occult writing. Like, it's not just adding another dimension to the world of the secret histories, which I already find quite exciting, but it is actually something that when you consider the sorts of figures who in the real world you might be consulting if you were to be, looking at a place like Hush House, there's actually a pretty decent connection to be made there. It's not just Weather Factory being clever. There is actually some historical precedent for these things, which personally I find really interesting. And so, I don't know, there's a few different ways that you can approach this stuff, right? But ultimately, I think there's just something really There's something really nice about music. There's a small amount of regret that I have about not pursuing music further than I did. And sort of the realization. Actually, the other thing is there's a piano where I work. So there's actually 2 pianos where I work. And while I don't think I'd ever play in public, there's just enough things that sort of lined up and said, you know what, this is something I really want to engage more deeply with. And while I'll be sad that I'm not as good as maybe I was before, I think that feeling is never going to be less that like the passage of time will not make that feeling feel any better. Me applying myself to those studies and the passage of time will be what alleviates that feeling. And so that's why I did it. And that's why I dropped the system chalk lore, as Ellen Ripley put it. So what I'm hopefully saying is we're at the end of January, but it's not too late to make a New Year's resolution. All right, so while we're waiting for that book to be read, I was threatening that I was going to read the descriptions of the rooms, and then we're going to go to the Tree of Wisdom. So let's read the room descriptions while we're waiting for the book to finish. The keepers are... Yeah, well, let's go from the Kukurbit Bridge, actually. So the Kukurbit Bridge, Hush House, has been many things over the centuries, including in the nocturnal period of 1896 to 1929, a jail. No one remembers that period fondly, but at least it meant that Nocturnal Branch paid for a new bridge. The Keeper's Lodge. For 500 years, in the times we call baronial, curia, nocturnal, there was always a keeper to watch the ways, weed the gardens, mend the roof when the sun was shining. There is no keeper now, but the lodge's roof still weathers the storms of Brandkrug Bay. Also, best of luck with your own electronic studies, Mr. Nuclear Monster. It's definitely something that did a good job of getting me back into music. Once I sort of realized I had the technology to be able to make my own things. The Watchman's Tower, Gatehouse. Back in the 11th century, Brian of Brittany built the tower and its gate to protect St. Brendan's Abbey, as Hush House was then known. Later, the Barons de Wolf strengthened the gate against their many enemies, but it's a long time now since Hush House was any kind of fortress, and by the time the scholars of the Curia took possession, this place had long been a comfortable waiting room for visitors to the house too minor to merit immediate attention. The notorious Ava de Wolf, first and last Baroness... the first floor. The notorious Ava de Wolf, first and last Baroness Brandkrug, liked this room because this side of the house carried the fewest memories of her poor father Valentine, so she could eavesdrop on the conversations of the visitors waiting below, or just because of how the pale light slanted through the windows in the last days of winter. I'm going to stop doing the... Okay, I'll do one more cycle with the money, but I really need to stop doing that because it's distracting from the rooms. The Watchman's Tower Observatory. Thomas de Wolf, 2nd Baron Brandkrug, who they called Baron Silence, built this observatory in 1576, by happy coincidence, just in time to observe the passage of the Great Comet in 1577. Bractic Garden. In the early days of St. Brendan's Abbey, the brothers practiced the arts of war here, so it was that in the baronial times, the garden became a favorite of the martial, quarrelsome de Wolfs. Hold that thought. Sunset Passages, a miscellany of funerary prayers, ceremonies, and hymns of the Church of the Unconquered Sun, which was ascendant in the 3rd and 4th histories. It schismed during the intercalate, when the sun was divided, and has not survived as a significant force. The Church revered the sun in splendor before it was divided, but even while it was still whole, its later selves were recognized as its names. The Madrigad, of course, presided over death and the passage into the house. The White Ceremony was spoken to honor the Madrigad at funerals held in the chilly space before dawn. The text cautions that all blades should remain sheathed while the ceremony is spoken, lest the corpse not be quiet. All right, Sacra Solis Invicti. And that is a Revelation text, so we can move that down to our Revelation shelves. So while we wait for that, now we're definitely not going to put Sacra Solis Invicti here because it's already at 9. So the rites of the Church of the Unconquered Sun and certain secrets of the gods from light. So if I were to try and level this higher, There's always more to learn, but it's time for me to stop, to rest after my long climb, and to enjoy the view. This is as high as this skill goes, for now. And probably forever, because I don't think... Well, maybe they'll come back and do another expansion for this, but clearly the current priority is traveling at night. Applebright Euphonies. Breath is the temptation of the soul, pleasures and insights that the church would call the secrets, the sisterhood the mysteries, and the bureau unsanctioned. Yeah, so I did 2 more than I needed. A sweet enchantment of a song. And we'll use our Foss to level it up because it's got Sky. Windstorm Echo Song. The intricacies of mathematics and the principles of flight. Law's touch is lighter than we sometimes think. At last I approach mastery. Alright, while we are working on that... St. Brendan's Cloister. The sisters and brothers of the Abbey built these gardens in the 13th century at the height of the period we now call Solar Gothic. Walk here a while and breathe the peace they left. Long Tower, Solomon's Study. In 1818, the Very Reverend Solomon Husher became third librarian of the Curia of the Isle. He took rooms in the Long Tower as his quarters. Husher's tastes were Spartan. Although the Curia generally liked a little more luxury, no one ever quite dared to redecorate the place after his disappearance. Takri, how are you doing? Very nice to see you. I hope you are well. I'm trying to make some decisions on where I will build the city unbuilt. My choices are Noon and Caer Ys. I'm actually curious, does anybody have any feelings on this? Does anybody know what Ys or Noon might be? Or why? Does anybody have a preference along those lines? It's definitely not going to be Twitch plays, but I'm curious if people have feelings on what the location should be. Let's keep my investigations on the Newman texts going, because technically those are the last ones I was going to follow up on. So I needed the Sky and the Scar. We skipped over that one because I didn't have the Sabazine. Solomon's Quarter, the Long Tower, Solomon's Quarters. Generally reckoned the chilliest room in the house, the Long Tower was usually called the Winter Tower until Julian Cosley, Magus Epistler, reputed Long, dwelt here briefly in the 17th century. Solomon Husher was the second known to sleep in the room. Evidently, they didn't mind the cold. The Scent Garden. This too dates from the time of the Abbey, but in summer, neither sisters nor brothers were permitted to spend more than a single hour here, lest the temptation of savours overwhelm them. The entrance hall, the beginning of the house proper. The Curia used to issue gloves and slippers of soft leather to protect the books and premises. Visitors were often asked to remove their shoes. Pause a moment and listen to the histories. The Physic Garden. The nuns of the Knot planted this garden of healing herbs in the Dawn period. Natan of Regensburg and Gideon de Wolf both expanded it, and the Curia of the Isle tended it. Even the branch and the bureau made use of it in the grim days that Brandkrug served as a prison. The Infirmary. In the 15th century, Natan of Regensburg came to Brandkrug. The brothers of St. Brendan's granted sanctuary, but they would not permit a Jew and his family to live on the abbey grounds. Still, they built this tower for him to dwell and practice his healing arts. It has changed greatly since that time, but a place of healing it remains. The Sky and the Scar, gnomic exhortations that might be described as emergency procedures for the return of the traveling kinds of the Carapace Cross. This book houses a Newman, a truth so powerful it can perhaps believe itself. Each page of this book, except the last, bears a single sign, clear and irrefutable as a gem. The final page is empty. The traveling kinds of the Carapace Cross might never return. Newman, back into balance. When the traveling Carapace kinds passed beyond the wave and the sky, they made arrangements for their return. there are histories where those arrangements might be invoked. All right, as before, I'm going to keep going with the Newman text. I realize that only gives me a minute to read the relevant material, but I still like the idea of making progress on our studies. Moving on, the Patient's Lounge. In this room, the accursed of the Great War gathered to recuperate, those who had suffered something no more horrible but somewhat more mysterious than the war's usual wounds to body and spirit, an eruption of worms, perhaps, or the risks at the military end of the Suppression Bureau activities, or at the end of Suppression Bureau activities. Among them were minor luminaries of the invisible world, Christopher Olopoli, Zachary Wakefield, Harvey Haddington, but not Brian Levinson, who had been 9th librarian, and under whose tenure the infirmary had flourished. He enlisted. He served for a time as a medical officer on the Western Front. His body was never found. The Motley Tower, Olopoli's nook. Christopher Olopoli, poet, painter, archivist, ruiner of seances, stayed on for a while at Hush House after the Great War. The librarian, Serena Blackwood, arranged rooms for Olopoli in the Motley Tower, ostensibly so he could help with the collection, but perhaps also because she saw a potential ally against the governor of the Kukurbit. Relations between the Kukurbit and the house were badly strained at the time. The Three and the Three, the St. Chiavi manuscript. Sadly, I'm much more familiar with Cultist Simulator than Book of Hours. Haven't played it yet, so I don't have a preference. And Mr. Nuclear Monster's got to run. Thanks for the stream. Thank you for the host, and thank you for everybody who stayed from Nuclear Monster's stream. If you want to let people know what you're doing after Outer Wilds, definitely feel free to let them know. I'm sure there's a few people who'd like to check out your stuff. But thank you for hanging out, and thank you for the conversation. Yeah, I'm sure you know Noon from Cultist Simulator. He's, I think actually, the more I thought about it, I think it does actually have a couple of references in Cultist Simulator, but definitely much more obscure ones. The Three and the Three, the St. Chiavi manuscript. This book describes the operations of the Chancel and the Calyptra, two triads of hours with subtle, far-reaching powers and responsibilities. Of all the extant versions, this one has best survived the interventions of the Calyptra. Certain knowledge cannot be learnt by any entity below the rank of No, outside the covenant of the Watchman's Tree. The enforcement of this rule is Calyptra. The three who enforce it are Calyptra also. It is said that Janus elects Calyptra, and that this chancel is the judgment of Janus, that Janus is the wound in the law. The Watchman's Tree is a compromise. If Calyptra could end it, they would. If the Watchman could end Calyptra, he might. Between their planes conflicting, sparks illuminate the angles of unmade law. Three rules. The hours are bound by their own edicts, even the chancel and the Calyptra. That's why their deepest rules are secret. In certain histories, if we know those deepest rules, we know that even the chancel and what the chancel and the Calyptra may not do. All right, we'll let night sort of roll over. We'll need to do some invitations, but I'm going to take advantage of the time to just sort of let the clock run by and do some exploration in the house. The Motley Tower Dispensary. This room may originally have served as a working dispensary, but some, at least of its more eccentric fittings, were added by Christopher Olopoli in his time here. By that point, he had severed ties with his adoptive father. He had been using the Olopoli name for years and had no access to the Strathcoyne fortune, but traveling at night had sold surprisingly well, much better than his poetry, and he had a little money of his own by then, enough to indulge his preferences. Okay. So now we are on to Towards a Fundamental Aesthetic and the second edition. I really like the description of the tone of the sequel, or second volume. It's not a sequel. Motley Tower, the Regensburg Room. The physician Natan lived here in the 15th century, and his family after that, tolerated by the monks, until King Henry dissolved the foundation and granted the isle to Hendrik. Hendrik turfed them out of the tower and furnished the place more to his own taste, but when Christopher Ellapoli moved in 400 years later, he restored what he could. Ellapoli wrote at the time of his sympathy as a rootless foundling for the outcast Natan. I don't know what I am, but I don't think I'm English. The examination room. Hendrik de Wolf evicted the family of the healer Natan from the Barber's Tower, as it was then called. I have rooted out the barber's brood, he is recorded to have gloated. But his great-great-grandson Gideon, the motley baron for his brindled hair, restored the tower and made it a place of healing again. Of course, the equipment in this room dates from the current century, but Gideon's other nickname was the Cutter. It was rumored that he bought corpses for dissection, even that he was a vivisectionist. The latter was probably a slander, but one way or another, scholars have been cutting up corpses in here for a very long time. Towards a Fundamental Aesthetic, or The House of Glass, Julian Cosley considered this his masterwork. This book houses a Newman, a truth so powerful it can perhaps believe itself. Techniques for perception and analysis which permit invidious and apocalyptic conclusions, probably the most assiduously suppressed book in history. The entire run was destroyed, even the presses were melted and dispersed, but the manuscript edition has survived. The perfect hegemony of the hours is perhaps eternal, but Cosley proposes and describes confinement inescapable, aesthetic and optical techniques which might contain even an hour, profoundly disrupting the order of the Mansus. He presents this as his own work, but there are hints here and there that he received inspiration or even assistance from the nowhere hour named Snow. Inescapable confinement. Everything ultimately comes down to a choice between eternity and history. There's only one place you're safe from both, and it's not a place anyone would want to be. It's a prison that can only exist in certain histories. And the final text with Newman. Volume 2. Let's keep going. The Servants' Hall. Hendrik de Wolf, 1st Baron Brankrug, was granted Hush House after the dissolution of St. Brendan's by Old Coppernose, King Henry VIII. In an act of unusual generosity for that tight-fisted king, the grant came with the title of Baron, and the right sicunt regale, like a king, the quasi-independence traditionally accorded to marcher lords. Hendrik was clearly determined to live as befitted his new rank, and he expanded the house accordingly to support sufficient staff. The Grand Ascent, ground floor, the staircase that served as the spine of the house, Baron Walter's great project, executed by the master mason Gregory Wheellock. The first floor of the Grand Ascent. By long tradition, each Baron Brankrug had their image set in a niche in the Grand Ascent. Later, the Curia of the Isle continued the tradition for their librarians. Second floor, same. Third floor, the same. The atrium. In 1651, Musgrave de Wolf endowed the atrium with a shrine to St. Januarius of the Gate. Musgrave was a pious man, but also a Puritan, so this grand shrine was a little unusual. St. Januarius is also an unusual choice, but he is the patron saint of boundaries, and the de Wolfs were often said, in some sense, to be marcher lords charged with the keeping of boundaries. And the last of the Newman texts, Towards a Fundamental Aesthetic, 2nd edition, or The Refinements of Light. Julian Cosley had never wanted or expected to write a 2nd edition of his masterwork. Julian Cosley long regarded Solomon Huscher as a charlatan, but his friend Nina Lagasse painted 3 paintings before her death in 1895, and these paintings apparently convinced Cosley to change his mind. With considerable irritation, he revised his magnum opus. The perfect hegemony of the hours is perhaps eternal. Cosley had always championed history rather than eternity, the exceptions, limitations, contradictions of freedom. But Huscher's and Lagasse's work convinced him to believe in the paradox of the eternal ending, a means in which perfection might be reconciled with freedom. He is not happy about it. This is perhaps the angriest book ever written in support of a peaceful philosophy of acceptance, but Cosley was always scrupulous about his conclusions. Newman, A Final Understanding. Eternity and history cannot be reconciled. Freedom cannot be perfection, not unless we understand the paradox of the eternal ending, and only in certain histories is that paradox possible. Any librarian can use this to establish a history and complete the game, but the magnate can use it to win a particular victory. Okay. So I am going to read some books again in the future, but I think for the rest of today, we're going to wait until sundown. If I don't finish all of the rooms, we're going to pause before the next day starts. We'll read the rooms, we'll read the descriptions of the Watchman's Tree, and then we will read our subset of Noon, Ys, and City Unbuilt texts. The Glorious Stair. Each stair tread is decorated with quotation from the Book of Sons, so that the congregation might be edified as they ascend. The quotes are worn to half legibility by the passage of all those worshipful feet, which may be why some of these quotations differ troublingly from any orthodox version. It has, of course, been claimed that the Sisterhood of the Knot, who first held the Isle, also held a copy of the long-suppressed Sheretic version of the book. The Windlet Gallery. In the days of the Brethren, every day this gallery would ring with the Liturgy of the Hours. In the times of the De Wolfs and of the Curia, there were services here every Sunday. All those times are long gone. This is a house of echoes now. The Foundry. This room was set aside for metalworking by Hendrik de Wolf. There's always been a smithy in Brandkrug village, but Hendrik wanted to make sure that he could have his pistol balls cast and his prisoner shackles mended, even if the villagers were feeling rebellious. When Ambrose Westcott arrived, he had little use for shackles and less for pistols. He refurbished this place for his metallurgical experiments. A bad place to be in summer, a good one in winter. Kitchen. Kingslet pie, a beef pie with pears and cinnamon and secret ingredients, is the traditional dish of the house. It was first cooked, they say, for King Henry when, in great secrecy, on St. Piran's Day, he came to Cornwall seeking the king's metal, tin, to restore his alloy. It probably didn't happen, but the pie did. The reading room. Visitors were usually permitted this far into the house and no further. In the days when the librarians commanded the services of the fine-takers, visitors were sometimes even left unsupervised. The Westcott Room. By God, sir, we shall have no cigars in the library, and we shall have no house without a smoking room. Dr. Ambrose Westcott, 1734 to 1797. The Severn Chamber. In the days of the De Wolfs, this chamber was reserved for the heir of the house, though it was originally furnished for Halfran, the woman of uncertain lineage who became Baron Walter's mother and bequeathed her unusual pale eyes and hair to Walter and his descendants. The Flood Gallery. Thirza Blake, 7th librarian of the house, extended this space, decorating it with semi-precious materials and filling it with the finest art Hush House's money could buy. Of course, after her enthusiasms brought the house to the brink of penury, much of it had to be sold off. The nave of the Abbey Church. For 1,000 years, the unconquered sun has been worshipped here in all his aspects, though since the heresies of the intercalate, many of those aspects are considered distinct hours in their own right, and the sun's death and birth are both now celebrated. The Abbey Church used to be more golden, but many of the valuables were lost at the Abbey's dissolution, including the original stained glass. These magnificent windows are of recent manufacture, financed by the 8th librarian Green, who is a believer of the Second Dawn variety. The Well. There's been a well here since the days of the Sisterhood, and superstitions have gathered around it like leaves and drifts. Its water has a healing virtue if drawn on the night of a new moon. It's ill luck to draw from it when you hear an owl. If you drip the blood of a living enemy into the well, they'll drown, and so on. Certainly when Numa comes, the mists lie thick here. Pantry. This room is close to the roots of the house, and so it had a troubled reputation with the servantry, who late at night might hear the pulse of an unseen drum, the buzzing of flies, voices crying out in tongues unknown, and so the servants would trade favors not to be the one to fetch spices for his lordship's posset after dark. The Mazarine Room. Kitty's pride and the house's joy. Kitty Mazarine was better known for her vocal compositions, but she was a versatile musician, and on winter evenings she'd invite visitors and villagers alike to her recitals. The Map Room. At the turn of the century, Sir David Green, 8th librarian and former Nocturnal Branch superintendent, had this room refurnished to plan his explorations and to manage the operations of his many agents. The Violet Chamber. In the days of the De Wolfs, this chamber was reserved for the lady of the house. Later, the librarians Willem Harries and Gervinus van Loren both preferred it to the librarians' quarters. Herries established a little shrine to St. Agnes in the far corner, and there it remained for many years until Van Loren ordered it removed. We will go down to these lower areas too, but I'm going to handle the upper parts of the house first. The kitchen garden. In 1652, Musgrave de Wolfe caught a traveling peddler stealing vegetables from this garden, an eccentric wanderer who went by Ricardo Milagro. Musgrave's ancestors would simply have hung the fellow, but Musgrave decreed 7 years' service in the garden instead. When the 7 years were up, Milagro had proved his worth as a gardener and chose to make Brandkrug his home. The grapevines here are cultivated with a rootstock he carried in his pack. Servants' quarters, south. When Hendrik de Wolfe left behind the life of a mercenary, he appointed his quartermaster as head of his new household. This would have drawn little comment, except that his quartermaster was a woman, the soft-spoken, steely-willed Ernestine Peterhans. For more than 5 decades, these rooms were her unchallenged domain. Even in her 80th year, she still walked her rounds every day, and the servants would fall silent at the distant jingle of her keys. The refectory. Here the whole curia used to meet, the librarian and the secretary solvent, vigilant, and enigmatic, sometimes even the secretary nunciant, though the duties of that office usually kept him away from the house. But there has only ever been one secretary persistent, and she never liked to eat in company. That was in the good times of the curia's heyday. In later years, the governor of the jail would sit at one end, the librarian at the other, and the clock would tick away the long silences between their words. The Pale Chamber. In the time of the de Wolfes, this magnificent bedroom was reserved for the Baron, or in Lady Ava's time, the Baroness. Ava had the whole room decorated in black as a gesture of permanent mourning for her father Valentine, or, according to ribald rumors, to set off her own paleness for her lovers. It was Kitty Mazarine much later who freshened the furnishings and made it the Pale Chamber. The Hall of Division. Ava de Wolfe first furnished this as her Hall of Division, holding feasts where the guests were selected by unusual and exacting criteria. Later, Thirza Blake, 7th librarian, employed the speculist Pomander to add more mirrors. Lots more mirrors. The chancel of the Abbey Church, the Church of the Unconquered Sun, acknowledges only a handful of hours. The sun in rags and splendor, the Menascate, the Madrigal, the Watchman, and reluctantly, the Wolf divided. Any other so-called hours must be lesser powers, wicked impostors, or superstitions. So the Church denies 2 of the 3 hours of the chancel, and yet it's the chancel who are said to determine which of their peers qualify as hours. That's theology for you. Abbot Geoffrey decreed that all 3 should be venerated in this holiest of rooms. To avoid actual heresy, he would not permit any of the 3 to be named. That's theology too. The Radiant Stair. The Watchman's Shrine here is decorated with the Eye Elegabline, a controversial variant of the Watchman's Eye. The Elegabline rites have always had a shaky doctrinal status. It would not often have been seen, of course. The stairs were reserved for the choir monks who sang the Liturgy of the Hours, the only ones permitted to enter the chancel. Still, it is a little surprising that the eye was allowed to remain, when the monastery was dissolved and the aisle given to the de Wolfes. The church tower. The bells in this tower rang every Sunday, even in Solomon Husher's time, until Thirza Blake finally cancelled services so she could save money by sacking the priest. This brought a deputation of angry locals from Brandkrug village, where there was a fearful superstition that when the bells of Brandkrug fell silent, the bells of Yes would be heard. So I'm going to make a note here about the church tower. There's a Yes reference there. The Tower Clock. George Collars, governor of Brandkrug Jail, oversaw the design and installation of this great clock, with the reluctant help of the librarian Serena Blackwood. She might have refused outright had she known how he intended to reuse the horologist's techniques for his so-called condignator. An inscription on the greatest wheel reads, "Strike the hours." This is particularly interesting because of what we hear in the Carishan Portalan, but I'll do my best to remember to refer back to this when the time comes. Bells. Giver, Teller, Sure's Tongue, Lady Janice, and Great Paycock are the names of these bells, though they're older than the abbey itself, and those names have certainly been corrupted over the years. By 1915, Scher's tongue and Lady Janice were too cracked to ring, and the Suppression Bureau paid for them to be recast. Serena Blackwood's quid pro quo for the assistance she gave George Collars with his clock project. And the Spire. Here Hendrik de Wolf met in secret with King Henry, once the Bronze King, now Old Copper-Nose, for the Great Debasement that ended the the Great Debasement had ended the supremacy of the Leashed Flame, and Henry's heirs were no more than human. There is a story that Hendrik's son Thomas listened from the rafters, that 3 times he heard Henry to ask his father to break a certain promise in the matter of Carriers beyond the wave, and the 3rd time the father did not refuse the king. This, says the story, is why Thomas never liked to make a promise thereafter, for fear of breaking it. I actually put the church tower note in the wrong spot, so please let me just adjust my notes. I'll just go to these 2 side rooms now. The Solarium. This room was once for the meditation of favored visionaries. Here, White Matilda prophesied the victory of the Iron King in the Wars of the Roads, much as it would occur 300 years later. She got the name wrong, though. Chapter House. Here, the monastic superiors would meet to manage the affairs of St. Brendan's and to resolve its disputes. Here, in 1349, the last trial of the nuns of St. Brendan's took place. 2 were executed for the murder of Abbess Nona, supposedly with perversions of the healing arts. Nona was the last abbess of St. Brendan's, and after the trial, the monastery never accepted female novices again. From the wide windows, the sea is always visible, beating on the rocks far below. We'll go up from the bottom again. Servants' Quarters North. This was once the private chamber of the formidable Ernestine Peterhans, Seneschal of Brandkrug. Baron Hendrik, and afterwards his son Thomas, would both descend the back stairs to visit her in person. For counsel, most said. For prayers, other insisted. Only the very foolish ever suggested there was any improper motive for their visits. The stores. At the time of the Prayer Book Rebellion, for some reason I keep thinking that I skipped a room somewhere here, but clearly I haven't. Stores. At the time of the Prayer Book Rebellion in 1549, Hendrik used this room as a prison cell for unfortunate locals, including the cunning man and rebel ringleader Red William, who had boasted of the curse he placed on Hendrik's heir. There will be no 7th of his line. There is a story told in Brandkrug village that Hendrik came to speak with the imprisoned William in person. There will be no 2nd of your line, he told him, and had him gelded there in this very cell and cast into the darkness of the caves below the house. There is another story that Eva de Wolf once answered an importunate suitor by bringing him here to this room and pointing out a stain upon the stones. The Dueling Hall. In baronial times, this was a ballroom, but in the 19th century, during Brulot's time as librarian, a dyad of eternally dueling Edgelong agreed to stay at Hush House for a year and a day to allow Natalia to study them, if she satisfied certain conditions. A properly equipped space was one of those conditions. Ultimately, the business turned out to be a trap or a trick played by one or both of the dyad, and they left after only a single battle. Their names are recorded as Mistress Dearday and Father Torg. The librarian's quarters. When the Curie of the Isle acquired the deed to the abandoned De Wolf estate, Ambrose Westcott became the first librarian and had this cozy nook constructed above the north wing to fit his preferences. His successor, Kitty, preferred the room next door. She lamented the reek of Westcott's pipe remained long after his death. And her successor, Solomon Husher, preferred the long tower for his own chilly reasons, but most librarians have enjoyed the peace and the sea view. Okay, so I think that's covered me for this big block of the house. We've got the wine cellar. Riccardo Milagro, traveler, rascal, Musgrave's gardener, managed a creditable wine from Brandkrug grapes. Cornwall has never really been wine country, and the reputation was unevenly maintained, but the Curie of the Isle kept a good cellar. The back stairs, the secret artery of the house. All those abbots and barons and all their crowds of retainers needed their chamber pots emptying and their boots cleaning. These are the stairs that the boots and the chamber pots went up and down. They were notoriously cramped and treacherous. It was a rare year that some poor scullion didn't crack an ankle. It was the Suppression Bureau, at long last, who remodeled the stairs and put in electric lights. And people say the Suppression Bureau never did Hush House any good. The Vestibulum Transitus. The Vestibulum Transitus was the wry name the Curia gave this structure. Before that, it was Valentine's Bridge, the sheltered crossing beyond which Baron Valentine's solitude was assured. The Earth Cellar. In the time of the Abbey, this was a shrine to St. Lucia the Eyeless. Since the heresies of the Intercalate, the Church of the Unconquered Sun considers her an aspect of the hour called Meniscate, but back then she was just the patron saint of stained glass workers and eye doctors. The tree in Earl Brian's field outside was traditionally hung with stained glass ornaments on St. Lucia's Day. Since the dissolution of the Abbey, though, it's mostly been vegetables in here. Earl Brian's Field. Brian is another one of those leitmotif names that recur in all through Bran Krug's long histories. This one was Brian of Brittany, who is named Earl of Cornwall by King William after the conquest. In 1068, the sons of the deposed King Harold mount raids on Cornwall, and Brian funds the construction of a fortified gate and the Watchman's Tower, initially in wood, to protect the abbey. In return, the abbey gives shelter to a yew tree he's brought from Brittany, that flowers in diverse colors. This is that tree, hollow now and rotting slowly from within, taking its time to die gracefully. It has not flowered in living memory, and the colors of its flowers cannot now be told, but Brian's brothers were called Alan the Red and Alan the Black. Stare Tenebris. There were shadows here in the earth long before the foundations of the house were laid. They retreated before the Romans' burrowings. They quailed before the sun hymns of the brethren. They slunk away before the blades and pistols of the barons de Wolf. Over all those centuries they shrank, until at last, when the Curia of the Isle sunk this stair, they could recruit one as a watchdog. The Night Gallery. In the 1850s, and in deep secrecy, Natalia Brulot built the Night Gallery into the foundations of the Gullscry Tower. Behind this heavy steel door, the Curia, and later the Suppression Bureau, kept treasures too difficult for common view, but too relevant to consign to a deeper vault. If anything difficult might hypothetically have been inclined to creep up the stairs from below, it would also have been discouraged by that door. The Gullscry Logia. When Baron Valentine's melancholia and his acusis became too much to bear, he began to take his meals here. With none of those sounds he found troubling, only the wind, the sea, and the cries of his beloved birds. After the de Wolfs were gone, the librarians of the Curia would come here when they needed to think in peace. The Gullscry Tower, Valentine's room. In his youth, Baron Valentine inclined to religion, and he made pilgrimages to holy sites on the continent. After he made his final pilgrimage to Fermier Abbey, the dreams began, of blood seeping from the earth, of a vast and pulsing wheel crushing the temples of men, and, which troubled him most, of twisted birds shrieking in pain, growing like fruit in the branches of an ancient yew. Gullscry Tower, Eil's room. Eils de Wolf inherited his father Valentine's madness, and was found unfit to inherit, so his sister Ava held the Isle in his stead. When his fits of violence became uncontrollable, he was confined here in the tower, where his sister would visit him 3 times a week until his escape, sometime in the late 1720s. Eil's ultimate fate remains unknown. The Gullscry Tower, Summit. In 1721, Valentine fell, or leapt, from the tower top. There were no witnesses, and his body was not found for 3 days. His daughter Ava was the last to see him alive, and of their last conversation she would only say that he had begun to fear the sun. The Lesser Bridge, Bran Krug Jail, built in 1896 at the behest of Nocturnal Branch to contain troubles unseemly and occult. A mere 6 years later, after the Ortuccio incident, the branch itself came to be considered unseemly and occult, and its functions were absorbed into the Suppression Bureau, but the jail still stands. Over the gate is the Bureau's motto, Alice si licit, tibi non licit, commonly rendered as, it is permitted to us, it is not permitted to you. I'm going to go left, down, and then up. Or actually, I guess I'll do this little block here. So The staff room. The warders at Brandkrug were a cut above your usual prison warder, former bureau constables, repentant no, turncoat Draguleri, veterans of the Legion de Soul. When the end came, none of that mattered, but here for a while, when the winter storms battered the walls, they hungered close to this glowing stove to share tea and comradeship and stories of their very different lives. The Adept Cell. 77 days in the cucurbit were considered enough to soften the passions of the most unrepentant adept. After that, they were usually charged and tried in closed court, very occasionally released, sometimes taken upstairs for one of Collar's experimental interviews. The Long Cell. The few long at Brandkrug were kept in cells triple buttressed with silver and steel and sanctioned spells. The Bureau knew their weaknesses, but never relied on them. This cell housed 2 immortals, an edgelong dyad. This would have required not only ferocious and eternal vigilance, but also frequent replacement of shattered furniture. The Crucible Tower, the Governor's Office. The Governor's Office, quietly luxurious, at least by the standards of the cucurbit. Collars was devoted to his cause and his service, but he did insist on his little pleasures. Question mark cell. This was the last prisoner to be admitted to the jail, but only the date has been recorded. No record of its origin, crime, or arrest remains. Collars was a man of many secrets. Sometimes, however, he was also a generous man, and he insisted it be provided with a bed and with writing materials should it ever feel the need for them. The worm-inhabited cell. The occupant of this cell could not be allowed fresh air and exercise. It could not have reasonably expected to leave this cell ever again, even while it wore human shape, but it could not be confined forever. In the end, somehow, it found its way into the walls. The jail hall. Here the guards and the prisoners would take their meals. Sometimes Collars, too, would descend from his tower and discuss philosophy with poisoners, ethics with Antæans, theology with Labites. Afterwards, he would generally burn his notes. The jail kitchen. There are no hours at Brandkrug, Collars used to say, even before he was governor of Brandkrug jail, when he was only secretary vigilant of the Curia. By way of reminder, the hands were confiscated from every timepiece within the prison walls. The warders could still rely on the chimes of the great clock in the abbey spire, but it did make life harder for the cooks. I keep forgetting that Collars was secretary vigilant. The jail cellar, the entrance to the sub-cellar, was barred, locked, chained, warded, both physically and otherwise. Whatever was kept down there, they took extremely seriously. It looks very much as if the questing worms broke the seals, drawn by the power below. It looks very much as if they regretted it. The loading dock, here the supplies came in, from every continent that the seas touch, from the bounds and beyond. Now and then, the prisoners would try to escape, but the sea is always hungry. Oops. Oh, come on. Let me read the room. The oubliette. Here, in a vessel shaped by fire and fate, George Collars confined a flame in human flesh, a blazing shadow of blazing future, a name of greed and time. Green called it the sun's bastard grandchild. Van Loren warned it of the second dawn's first spark, but Collars spoke of it reverently as the leashed flame's true heir. The Crucible Tower, Governor's Quarters. In this room, the governor was Collars the artist, Collars the dreamer. It was a side of him that almost no one saw, especially when, after the death of his wife, he grew so much more solitary. That said, there is a connection to be drawn between his enthusiasm for sculpture and his ambitions for his human subjects. The Crucible Tower, the interview laboratory. When a prisoner resisted all other interventions, Collars would bring them here to test and refine their worth. His successes might be transferred to Zurich or turned over to the Legion de Soul to earn their humanity, or even at least once released, but his successes were not numerous. Here at last, when the fire began, is where the fire began and where it ended, when the power below the prison was released. It came here to interview Collars. Perhaps it intended to put him in his own device, but it seems that there was not nearly enough of him left for that. All right, we will descend to the Dawn Period rooms. The Hidden Stair. After Brillou's retirement in 1861, the Curia found itself short of promising candidates until the arrival of Willem Herries, a former Dutch Lutheran priest and sometimes correspondent of Stanislav Schaller. He had been a missionary in the Dutch East Indies until his faith was lost or transmuted into a devotion to St. Agnes of the Gate, and he was drawn to Hush House. He won his position by presenting the Curia with a key long lost. That was the key to this very stair, but only the naive would assume that the key was a tangible object. The Whispering Stair. This was the stair that the priestesses walked in the time that this was the Abbey of the Black Dove. Their carved faces still guard the walls. Their prayers may still be heard when the airs of the aisle are exceptionally still. The Well Descent. Rungs line the well's side. This must lead down to the oldest part of the aisle, to the shrines of the sisterhood. It may be that the servants of the De Wolf family still came here in secret, even while they paid lip service to the rites of the unconquered sun. The Deep Well Descent. Each of the great roots here carries a garden of fruiting fungus. Great black bumblebees buzz improbably between them, gathering spores, droning peace. I should examine this amber. Sunset's colors, pine's blood. The Gull Colony. Through all the isle's long years, the gulls, heedless of our affairs, have taken their due from the sea and returned it to the rocks. Careful where you step. The Hermit Cell. The words Red William are scratched into the wall by the bed nook. This was the name of the cunning man who laid a curse on Hendrik de Wolf, that there would be no seventh of his line, the cunning man that Hendrik de Wolf gelded and imprisoned beneath the house. But this doesn't look like a cell. There would have been no locks. Perhaps that other story is true, that William was an initiate of the Thunderskin, secretly maintained by Hendrik to prophesy for him in the ancient manner. Who were the De Wolfs? Well, really? Boathouse. The best way to come to Brandkrug unnoticed. Most recently, an unofficial means for Suppression Bureau officials to come and go. The Sea Caves. The Curia's last secret. Right under Governor Collar's nose. Levinson, Blackwood, and Van Loren all continued their careful investigations of the Brandkrug Sea Caves. Many of the species here are unknown to Cornwall. Some have not even been seen anywhere under this sun. The Deep Light Caves. When the gods from stone were swept away, the Carapace Cross who had served them were swept away too. The Seglas kind, the Wyrmfota kind, the Gladerflog kind, all those wise and mighty ones are gone into nowhere, or hiding, or us. Here, in the fire-warmed waters, away from the justice of sunlight, their legacy quietly thrives. And finally... Oh, come on. The Shrine to St. Tentretto, the Carapace Cross, the hybrid race who in their many kinds were winged, legged, eyed, bright, dark, scaled, feather, chitinous, and us? The cross are gone. The cross were always history, but to their children, their enemies, they leave this hushed legacy. Cat. The Smuggler's Den. In the last years of the 18th century, the De Wolf line ended and the estate lay empty. Enterprising smugglers spread rumors of the ghosts that walked the isle and quietly brought their tea, brandy, and tobacco in through the old mines on the seaward side of the isle. But the remnants here are much newer than the 18th century. Perhaps even after the Curia took possession, they permitted the smugglers to use this place. Ambrose Westcott did love his baccy so. Perhaps even the Suppression Bureau found the smugglers useful enough to turn a blind eye. Our Lady Beneath. Who is Our Lady? The Red Grail, which gives life, which takes life, which is not sated. The Horned Axe, who bears two blades, who waits at the threshold, who sunders that which should not be joined. The Ringyew, who is succulent, who is renewed, who encompasseth. Or a fourth, who is always signified but never named. A librarian might phrase the question differently. Who was first? I've always wondered where the signifier is. Narthex, if you were a pilgrim to the Abbey of the White Crow, you'd purify yourself here. You didn't want to track profane Dumnonian mud or alien Mare Britannicum salt into the holy precincts, or unclean thoughts. Especially not unclean thoughts. The priestesses here were a little more merciful than the hours they served, but only a little. The sacred spring, the eye marked on the rocks here is not the watchman's eye that decorates the church above, but the eye that marks the temple of the wheel in dreams. The priests of the sun would tell you there was no sight before the rising of the sun, but those who've drunk from this spring will dream of another sun, one that swung lower in the sky, one that would speak with us, one that would accept friendly gifts of blood from us. Oops. The upper pump room. See the pickaxe marks on the walls. Before the Sisterhood came to the Isle, the Romans or the Phoenicians dug these tunnels, scratching in the ground for tin and for gold. For centuries, those pumps kept the sea at bay, driven by slaves or votaries who saw the sun one day in 9. When those pumps fell silent, the sea crept in, until much later the Curia brought in their own machines to open up the lower levels again. The Hall of Voices. Here the higher initiates of the threefold mysteries would meet to manage the affairs of the Black Dove and to resolve its disputes. Here they voted to blind and expel the chorates of the Thunderskin, who had trespassed in the inner chambers and spied on the mysteries. From that time on, the rites of the Thunderskin were not permitted on the Isle, and the sacred drums fell silent. But the waves still beat the bones of the rock, even now that slow pulse comes. I always like the parallel that's drawn between the Hall of Voices and the Chapter House. The Chapel Callicite. The Red Grail says, never speak of this mystery. I was always the first, and I must always be greatest. When we spilt the blood of the Thunderskin, I feasted and I grew strong, stronger again than the twins. There is always a feast, and nothing is truly wasted. The Chapel Assite. The Horned Axe says, never speak of this mystery. When the Thunderskin was mortal, he served the hours who slew my kind. I required the Thunderskin's death, and so the Grail gave him up. There is always a reckoning, and nothing is truly forgiven. The Chapel Malachite. The Ringu says, never speak of this mystery. When the Thunderskin was mortal, he loved me first, and so the Grail destroyed him. Now the Thunderskin delights forever in my succulence. There is always a renewal, and nothing truly ends. The Lower Pump Room. The Curia installed these pumps when the lower levels of the Sisterhood's holy place were already dry. Why? What were they looking for? What lies beneath Brandkrug Isle, even that even the Sisterhood never found? The Columbic Crypt. St. Columba, with 12 companions, brought the world of the unconquered sun to Scotland, where he founded a monastery on the blessed Isle of Iona. There he died, and there his bones remained until the Northmen came. But in Cornwall they speak of his 13th companion, a hybrid beauty called Rowena, who was perhaps his tutor, perhaps his seducer, or perhaps his daughter. At his death, the monks sought to stone her for her impurities. She bore Columba's bones away so the monks would not have them, substituting, out of tact or mischief, the bones of a horse. She brought the bones to a hidden isle, where she made a double foundation of nuns and monks, and became the first abbess. But she would admit none of her order who was a virgin, nor innocent of any crime. Since then, the isle has been a refuge for all the world might consider impure. The Catacombs. In the days of honey, those who remembered brought the bones of their dead to the grey rock in the sea. In the time of the Eagles, those who remembered brought the bones of their dead to the grey rock in the sea. In the time of the Bear King, the clans brought the bones of their dead to the grey rock in the sea. When the Wolf Kings came, those who remembered brought the bones of their dead to the grey rock in the sea. Through all the years of sun and bronze, those who remembered brought the bones of the dead to the grey rock in the sea. Much is taken, much abides. The Iron Vault. Where did the Curia of the Isle come from? Across the western ocean from Noon, where the Order Lamea made their home. That would raise more questions than it answered. But this vault would seem to be of their making, and it would also seem to reference the oath called the Iron Chain, which binds every resident of Noon to remain hidden from the world, so that the Calyptra might not look upon us, so that the chancel might not hear our names, so that the hours might not devour us. All right, so gonna make a note of that one. The Ivory Vault. How did the Curia of the Isle begin? There is no evidence they began with the House of Leith, that society of unseen immortals bound by 3 oaths. But this vault, much newer than the tunnels above, does seem to reference the oath called the Ivory Chain, which forbade commerce with the hours, except sometimes with the winter hour known as the Elegist, or the Ivory Dove. Solomon Husher remarked that this might be considered less an oath of rejection of the hours and more as an oath of loyalty to the Elegist. But Solomon, of course, vanished into the snow. The Rowanarium. Once there was a brother and sister who loved each other greatly. They resolved that they were one soul split into 2 bodies, and their greatest wish was to become one. They found the hidden isle where the twins, the sister and witch, had arrived when they crossed the great ocean, and a sacred pool on which the moon shone only once a year. There they spoke with the twins in dreams, and learnt how they might become conjoined as one flesh and immortal. Now the brother's resolution failed him, and though he loved his sister, he could not choose to spend eternity joined in one flesh. The sister could not persuade him, and she would not abandon him or force him, so they used their arts to live long lives, close but separate, and they made a double foundation of monks and nuns, as chaste as they had always been, but each nun had her brother twin, and none could enter alone. In time, the sister found her own immortality, and to this day she walks the world by moonlight. The brother died, and his bones are buried in the room beneath the well, but his children live on. Hello, Che, and hello, Algrins. The Silver Vault. Did the Curia of the Isle construct this vault? They were not long. Most of them were not long, so they were not obliviots. That society of unseen immortals bound by 3 oaths. But this vault does seem to reference the oath called the Silver Chain, which forbid men to lie with women, or women with men. For what may come is not always a crime of the sky, yet that is a furious danger. Okay, so we did find a few rooms that referenced Ys and Noon. Now, I realize I've been reading a whole lot. I would like to go through the Tree of Wisdoms again, which I realize is going to be another batch of reading. Unfortunately, that forces the game to pause on me. So, better to just get through it. So, the Roots of Memory. Here I begin my climb. As you learn skills, you can decide where in the Tree of Wisdoms they belong, enriching your soul as you catalog the invisible world. We'll start with the Hushery Wisdom. The Queen's Wound. A queen could not love no other, only her own image. She sought 9 colors to grace the image, and the last was the turquoise of her eyes, a gift from the Shadowless King. Her court poet hymned his queen and her image, and in his poem she heard the truth, that the image was greater. So she fled into the wood, and the image ruled her domain with the poet as its consort, but it always remembered her kindly. Much is lost. Still all the winds, still every beating tongue. Now still the mirrored moon, the sea's cauldron. When nothing's left, then nothing is undone. A wound in dreams. Before speech we could not dream, which is to say that before speech tore open the peacock gate to dreams, the mantis was unwounded and at peace. It's not obligatory for long to pass that gate, but they generally choose to. Perhaps that's why the hours charge their names to hunt down Long, even the Long who claim to serve them. Revenge. The gods who are, which we call the hours, ward against the gods from stone and cast them down. What remains of the gods from stone we call plague, scourge, catastrophe. If the hours were cast down in their turn, would the gods from stone be satisfied? Would revenge bring peace? The night arts hint that might be so. The The watchman's tree has flowers three, black, red, and white. Red is the life that flows in the body's courses, and white is the writing at the body's core. The end. The artist knows that every work could be improved. The artist understands perfect work can never be completed. Truths that were, the inks called incastum terminale, are permitted only to the librarians of the Watchman's Tree. Those inks can be used to reveal truths, even truths that are no longer so, not since the dawn times when the sun hung red and low and we felt its warmth like autumn. If that first and gentlest sun returned, the truths might return with it. Glass the keeper, the fundamental purpose of a glass vessel, to separate what is without from what is within. Perhaps this was the first purpose of the first hour, and only in that first moment could there be perfect understanding. Safety in silence. Unwise words are dangerous. Mourn them, remember them, speak them not. On to Nyctodromi. An arrangement, something not commonly understood. Without Vac, the exception, there could be no Calyptra, the law. Vac is, in this sense, and perhaps every sense, Calyptra's servant. What may not be, there is a prophecy of a shining city that mortals might build. There is a paradox that a city unbuilt can always be greater than one that exists. The night arts teach this resolution, that the gate to that city must be shaped of black sapphire and raised in dreams. Okay. What remains? The sea, Whale Road, Salt Realm, Moon Way. Anything given to the waves may find another home, unless its home is the sea. The passage, words are the way through sky, and song without words is no song at all. The Wolf Wife, the Legian Rowena, holder of the Mare's Key, called Sea Opener Wolf Wife. Whom did she invite from Ye's behind the wave? When the moon sets across the sea, will they follow its road again? Okay, another one for ease. From Change, we recognize the dream places that the Watchman shows us, though we have never seen them before. Perhaps we were something else when we saw them. Words to walk by. Unwise words unlocked unwise doors. We can use wise words to lock them. Sapphire. There is a prophecy of a glorious city that mortals could raise, but the hours of the chancel have decreed that it will not exist. The decrees of the chancel are not defied, but now and then they have been circumvented, and we might conceive that a city with walls of shining flint could be raised in dreams, in the Mansus. Peacock. The night arts teach that the Peacock Gate is the highest door in dreams to which mortals may aspire. But that before she rose to this estate, the gate was a name of the horned axe. All right, on to Skolakosophy. The Dartsmen, the assassins of the Traguleri, who end the long lives of Long, tell stories of wars between the hours in the dawn of the world, when the sun was red and low. Wars where the savage sound of savage bells unraveled the light of moon and sun. Wars where dreams burned on pyres, where long were the fuel. All this ended, the Traguleri say, once the worms came, and the hours had a common enemy. And so the Traguleri fear worms, hate worms, and make offerings to worms. Hey, Tiberiosity. Enjoy your lurk. In ashes, all days are death, all lives are sunset. For a time, light persists, but we should not fear the scorch of a second dawn. Of locks, the locksmith's first duty, a key for every lock, and a lock for every key. If a key were an hour, what lock would it open? Secrecy, knowledge, power. The sights we name are rarely named by day. The shapes we seek are rarely sought in clay. The names we claim are often claimed as pay. Rhyme and remembrance. The chandler's kindling. If flowers are flame, the earth is their fuel. The hour named flower maker cannot harm us, and he cannot find us, but he always has what we desire, and the hour named chandler can bring the spark to light the flame. Carapace. Of the Lesian Medusa, it has been said she might be the oldest of her kind still living, and she is dead. Skolakosophists say she is the oldest of the Seglas kind, of a carapace lineage famed for the breadth of their wisdom and the sharpness of their teeth. The first sun. In the dawn times the sun was lower, so we gave it our blood. From our blood it knew us, and so it was kinder, but those days are long gone. If we were foolish enough to find the first sun and give it our blood again, it would devour us. If we fed it the blood of our enemies, of course, it might devour them. And the chandler's path. When the chandler goes a-hunting in the dark of the wood, he shields his candle so his prey is not forewarned, but he leaves a trail of ivory wax so that we may follow him and purchase his prizes. After all, the goal of every hunt is to bring home a trophy. Okay. On to the Bosque. The Weaver's Tale. There is a prophecy of a master weaver who will unwisely seek to find the future in a tapestry of her own hair. Her house will grow dark, shrouded in the labyrinths of her tresses. The pilgrims will seek her in the cellar of her house, where she will plead with them to cut her free. They will always fail, and she will always devour them. At last, one will come who will instead ask to stay with her. Others will join them until the house becomes a palace, and the palace a city below the world, where all are welcome, and in the tapestry all truths are revealed. Grail and Moth. The gods from stone made a law that the keys of dream cannot be held or owned. The time of stone is past, but the keys remain. So the holders of these keys can only be the 7 Lesians, whose crime has set them outside the law. The Lesians serve an hour of Grail and Moth, with the last remnants of the gods when the last remnants of the gods from stone are consumed, the law will be consumed with them. Underneath, red the dawn and black the night, and white what's left. Above we see, beneath we know. What endures? Cut a thread, and the tapestry must be healed. The root and the source. In the innermost walled garden of the palace of the shadowless kings in Persia, there grew a yew tree older than any other. Its root was red, its flowers were black, its berries were white. The kings would leave their girl children overnight in the nest of its roots, in memory of the great mother of their line, and so their daughters were assured health, longevity, and wisdom. This is the source of all our science. What may be known, Calyptra, is the law that requires secret knowledge to be concealed, except in the libraries of the Watchman's Tree. The number of the hours of Calyptra is 3, and we do not speak of the oldest hour, though we remember her. The Grail's favorlings, the bright-winged, dart-winged Gladerflog kind, called themselves the Grail's favorlings. They are gone now, like all the carapace kinds, but we can still use the arts of the hive to glean the sweetness in the hidden places of the wood, the legacy of the carapace cross. Zarog is the reason. Zarog is basically the Book of Hours prequel. What is taken? The oldest living hours are the gods who were blood. The gods from stone were older still, but they're buried in the earth, scattered in the sea, lost to the moon. This is why we're always careful when we make the sacrifice, because if we spilt enough blood on their graves, they'd return for their revenge. The well in the wood. When the first hunters were starving in the wood in the days before its darkening, they found a deep and crimson well. In it they drowned the beasts of the earth, so that the beasts would be reborn threefold, and the hunters could feast. So the Red Grail came to be, and so ever since she feeds us and feeds upon us. Preservation. The Thief's Tale. There is a very old story told by thieves about a competition among the Aviform Hours, the secret gods who take the shape of birds. The dove boasted of the bones he'd stolen from flesh, and the crow of the flesh he'd picked from bones. One of the kite twins bragged that she'd stolen the borders from kingdoms, and the other that she'd taken the roads from crossroads. The magpie told all the colors he'd taken that are no longer found in the world, and the laughing thrush topped that with tales of the sights she'd stolen. But when the glitter-winged seventh of their number told them what he'd stolen, they were all shocked into silence. They fell upon him and stripped him of his wings and drove him from the sky. So he and what he stole are gone from the world, and now we cannot even name them, but still we feel their lack. To heal. A deft enough binding might heal anything. Flesh, spirit, song, stone. What might be? Dream of a city of perfect balance. There can be no perfect balance outside dream. Meditate on the hour named Meniscate, whose light distinguishes the possible from the real. Let the city remain unbuilt. Sorry, just making notes. A vigilance. The hours once called Flint and Wheel are gone, but the blood of their name emanations was mingled with the blood of mortals, and from it sprang the line of Antaios. As long as the Antaian line continues, the legacy of Flint and Wheel may endure. The light, the night, the wood. What lit the wood in the days before its darkening? There was a light upon the earth long before glory came to the sky. Preserve the night, and the light might return. Night. Velvet is not the oldest hour, but she is the oldest hour of Calyptra. The black flower on the watchman's tree is the preservation of secrets, and without it, the tree would fall. Just give me 1 second here. Okay. Birdsong. The Fisher's Tale. There is a story told beside the sea of a city of amber and orichalcum that lies behind the waves. I'll just write this down now. The Fisher's Tale. There is a story told beside the sea of a city of amber and orichalcum that lies behind the waves. Those who eat of its fruits can breathe water and drink light, but they can never drink anything else afterwards. Only in another history, they say, but if you tie your nets right, you might just catch one of its citizens in this history, and they might just tell you the way. A city. The 7 tainted immortals we call Legions are relentless in their appetite and outcast under the laws of heaven. But they have their uses to the hours. The Legion Cleidochus has known all the great keys, and even now she holds the key of days. So every year she meets the vagabond in Vienna to exchange the names of lesser keys for the stories of the vagabond's travels. The Roost, a thief of sights, a scavenger of thrones, a border reaver, and a thief of knots. a thief of colors, and a thief of bones. How they began. In the beginning, the Carapace cross served the first hours, the gods born from stone. And the first of the Carapace cross were the Thritage kind, who sought the monarch at the crossroads to rule them wisely, and found him in themselves, who began as many and ended as one. The Wolf's Return. The sanctioned version of the Book of Suns says that the wolf divided was awoken by the sun's division. We know from this that the wolf was its own hour, even when the sun was whole, so we glean and we guess that the sun might be healed and the wolf might return to its slumbers. So we glean and guess that a second dawn would bring peace, but the wolf will fight to prevent it. The Threshold. Every traveler crosses a threshold twice. The horned axe is the hour who faces both ways at every threshold. Looking up. The gardener's first lesson is this: look up. What starts as weather ends in the world. What starts as sky ends in soil. This is what the birds know. This is what the birds know most things first. Okay, Horamachistry. The Jeweler's Tale. A master jeweler who made a wager with a keeper of butterflies. The master jeweler claimed his jeweled egg would hatch something greater than any of the butterfly keeper's chrysalids. Of course, after a month, the butterfly keeper's gardens were bright with wings, and the egg had hatched nothing at all. The jeweler, unable to pay his debts, fled into the desert with his egg. Perhaps we should be careful of our limits. The first enemy. Vac is a great scar, the first enemy of Calyptra. When the black flower blossoms on the watchman's tree, she retreats and Calyptra protects perilous knowledge behind secrecy's veil. When it is permitted, certain knowledge is forbidden to mortals, unless it's wisely contained. This law is named Calyptra. The enforcement of this law is named Calyptra also. The 3 hours who enforce it share that name. They permit that knowledge to persist only in certain sanctioned places, and the most dangerous secrets must only be recorded in the inks called incastum. The weapon, the greatest and most secret truths, can only be recorded by the librarians of the Watchman's Tree, even then only beneath the shelter of the tree's branches, and only in the sanctioned inks called incastum. There are still certain languages in which these truths might be spoken aloud, but the hours no longer permit that power in the mouths of mortals. The toll. In the right mortal's hand, the right tool can become the weapon that begins a war. Of limits. The hours are not all-powerful. There is a place beyond their reach, where mortals and immortals might build a shining city of iron and ivory. Maybe. The heart, the thunderskin, the eternal drum that beats to preserve the skin of the world, is a god from flesh, which is to say he was once mortal, but the horned axe, the last of the gods from stone, required his death, and so the Grail gave him up, although he loved her. Love is always subject to the will of the hours, as all Horamachists know. Black sapphire. The bright arts speak of a shining city unbuilt. One day we might build it in the Mansis, the great house of dreams, with a foundation stone of black sapphire. Okay. A light above. The new king's light shines brightly. The sanctioned version of the Book of Suns tells us that he may herald the unification of the gods who were light into a new sun and splendor. On to Ithistry. 2 more to go, and then we're done. The stars. A Smith's proverb in Brankrug. What starts in the sky ends in the earth. A story goes with it, that the village smith's anvil in the time of the DeWolfs was hatched from meteor stone, and so every plow in the village knows something of the stars. Not many remember the story, but everyone remembers the proverb. Served hot. Copper, coal, fire, cinnamon, sunlight, obsidian. Add salt to taste. Serve. A red blossom, stories written in fire and all the sooner, but are remembered all the longer. Change is the only certainty. The tree. Never underestimate the hour named Madrigad. Foolish adepts deride her as an hour of ashes. What do they think the watchman's tree sprang from? Of swords. Birds of a scale, wings and talons bright. Worms of a feather, kissed again by stones. Kissed by fire, kissed by snow, by blight. The straight, the world is all in balance. With time, care, with ingenuity, we can restore the balance through the shaping of stone, the equilibrium of ichors, the unhatching of the egg. And the final batch, illumination. The king and the key. A great and golden king held the only key to his deepest prison cell. One day he asked his minister to make 8 copies and distribute them among the people. But sire, the minister said, if a rebel contrives to enter our palace, might they not release their confederates? They might, answered the king, but all kingdoms fall, and one day I might myself seek release from that cell. A tongue of sky, Crack-Track was a gift from the light above the world. When glory touched the first life motes with this language, they entered the waking world. Steel and glass. A certain parable of the bright arts tells of a priest who raised an altar of steel and glass to an old god, but then found a new god within the altar. Tomorrow's light. Every regret is a lesson. We cannot change what is past, but neither should we wish to. The first sunrise. Yesterday's light determines the colors of tomorrow, and we all began in light. From light. If even the sun's division was a plan, then once we complete that plan, we'll bring the second dawn and unite the sun. It won't be easy, but what great work ever is. The scar. The mansis is the fortress of dream where the true hours rule, but nowhere is the scar beneath it where the nowhere hours lair. Without the hours above, that scar would be an open wound, so the bright arts teach us. And understanding creates conflict. When we name our differences, we learn our enemies. Where there are no names, there are no enemies. And then I believe here we have, so up by the roots, the Hostorium entered into a formal arrangement with the Suppression Bureau. Connie Lee, profoundly unhappy with the arrangement, did her best to expose it, and then fled to find a new life. The god abolished. Lieselotte had been exalting willing humans with the implementation of the larval Blomberende kind. Now that Kittling Ripe's attention has been drawn to these tasty hybrid treats, the scheme is doomed. Adaptationes Miriabilis. The vagabond, along with 2 other hours, proposes to challenge Calyptra with a flower that is neither black nor white. She hoped the Carapace Cross would tend a garden of those flowers in the fallen city of Maya, but they prefer to dwell there in peace without risking Calyptra's anger. The lark returned. Zuthi had been stealing secrets from the trove of Crookie, name of the beach crow. These secrets might have meant war among the hours, and so they will be returned safely to Crookie. Safety for Arthur. Arthur imprisoned the Labite Abacassus, but he is safe from Echidna's vengeance. And I think that's it for the stories. Although, of course, we'll have another one before too long. Okay, so I thank you all for your patience. The one last batch of readings that we will do before we set the clock. That's easy to remember. There will be a quiz later. The last thing I'm going to do here is read the text that I have on my list, at least as much as I can. This is the last big push for lore related to these two choices I'm going to make. Key of Night. Oh god, where'd I put that one? Okay, then the Karashim Portalon should be the last on this list. I'm gonna just double check that, but... Okay. I have a couple of other candidates I want to follow up on, but let's keep moving. So I guess I'll do Ava's Treasury. I think I'm going to run out of desks. Yeah, that's not Ava's Treasury. I think it's a Foresight book. Bingo. Now, technically, there's this one, but I'm not going to well, I mean, I guess I can have the Final Understanding, but I don't think the Newman gives me too much to think about. Oh, okay. Maybe I do have more desk space than I thought then. Oh, God, which one is this again? Messenger awaiting your destination. I can never remember this one. All right, let's go from the top. Okay, I got a lot more of that done than I thought. So next one I'm going to read, possibly last one, is Serenity of the Black Wood. Okay. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, so we got. I think I'm missing one of on Matthias and Amethyst Imago. Sorry about the wait for this. I'm just trying to... I just don't want to be careless in terms of looking... Okay. I'm pretty sure I'm missing one. Matters and Deeds of Serpents. That's a VAC text, so that's also a manual of departure. I had a note on this one with a question mark on it. Oh. Okay, I think I'm going to leave this... I'm going to leave it to this batch right now. Which means I'm going to leave the consider verb open. But once these are done, I think I'm going to do another batch on the House of Leith and offshoots. And then we will, because it's the last day of winter, I'm going to write up the invitations for the salon. And we might get through the salon. I am already half an hour past when I was going to go, but I know we've done a lot of reading, and then I also had the... I did also have the glitches in terms of the bit rate. Remember we talked about world building before. I finally just wrote something this week. It'd basically just be a prelude that I'm sure I'll delete someday, but wrote something. Well, that's nice to hear. I'm also really glad that you got something out of that that essay. Obviously, Alexis Kennedy is a much more knowledgeable individual on world building, both from a practical point of view, very experienced in it, but I like that. So I tend to weigh a little more heavily on the scholarly side of things, right? So if you ask me to solve a problem, I'm usually going to go and do a big literature search, and I'll refer to I'll usually refer to like stuff that other people have done. And there's a lot of value in doing that. But obviously, again, you can't stay in the realm of theory. It is nice to sort of mix that with practice. This is actually one of the big appeals of economics to me because, while there are people who do theoretical work, I think most of the stuff that gets published usually has some sort of applied side, right? It's not just... usually the applied side is the part where you answer the question, how do I know you didn't just make that all up? And again, I don't want to imply that there's no room for pure theory. It's just, it's harder to do that. I think particularly because a lot of people think they can do it and don't deliver. So I really do like the fact that it quotes Tolkien and things like that. I do like that it has... it does have some research, because I really feel like that article, based on the experience of the author, would justify its existence alone, like through the fact that that person wrote it. But I do like that it has those references. I also kind of wonder whether or not that's something that he consulted when he was getting started, or if that's just, the work that gets done afterwards. Because I definitely feel that people can sort of either independently discover these things or just have a good instinct, and then later on read the material and say, hey, this is actually a really good idea. This helps make the point for me. There's definitely been a few times where I've felt that. But obviously it's nicer to just cite the source rather than say, I actually found this independently. That kind of makes you sound like a bit of a jackass. But... Okay, the voyages of Furnishon of Auriel, the impossible travels of a sea captain of the late Phoenician era, suppressed throughout recorded history, and those who read it were said to disappear. Furnishin clearly visited the Mansus, sailing the length of the Painted River. He also claims to have traversed a sea of finest sand, to have dared the blazing waves of the sun's surface, and to have descended to an underworld ocean lit by lamps of black nephrite. Furnishin's final voyage is to retirement on a peaceful island across an evening sea, where he identifies a spring whose waters will keep him safe. "I'll be forgotten," he declares, "and this work my only trace." The Carbonek Schism. The Order of Obliviots, on the brink of schism, assembles in a bounds house identified only as Carbonek after the Fisher King's castle of legend. There the no and the long of the Order debate their long policy of non-involvement in matters of feather and scale. One of their number, the one recording their debates, describes how in desperation he has found some kind of solution in a volume of transcendent heresy, but dares not pursue it alone. He convinces a handful of other Obliviots to depart Carbonek with him, while the others cross the sea to Port Noon. In the last few pages, the author reveals himself as the no-adept Ambrose Westcott, writing in an uncharacteristically serious mode. He informs any who should find this work that he has returned the book he spoke of to Abbot Geoffrey's Secret, where it can be retrieved with certain invocations of the Sacra Lamea. He hopes that the one who has read this far and understood this much will find a history to determine. The Crossing to Noon. The mystic Garcia Sauri gives a picturesque account of the adventures of Franklin Bancroft, Prince of Wines, and Ava de Wolf, the Pale Lady, on their way to the hidden island of Noon. For a long time the Blackbone pondered her next move, until the moon dared to peep from behind a cloud, and the prince completed the composition of his third sestina, but the lady met the blind gaze of its open pores, waiting for the tide. Garcia Sauri acknowledges in an epilogue that it is widely known that Ava in fact tragically drowned herself and her twin infant granddaughters without ever making such a journey. But he adds contemptuously, it is also widely known that the city unbuilt will so remain, that only one history is ever written, and that Janus is a Mansus prank. The Kerishim Portolan, a beautifully illustrated and heavily annotated portolan, a nautical atlas of ports and destinations. It quickly becomes clear that many of its destinations no longer exist or never existed in the traditional sense, but the annotations remain fascinating. The routes to Noon, the long sanctuary across the Western Sea, may remain viable. 2 pages have been gummed together. When teased apart, they reveal a route to Ys Behind the Wave, marked in red and gold inks with heavily underlined warnings. Here the final city, strike the hours, lest the earth and sky break open. So this is one of the reasons why I made note of George Collars, governor of Brandkrug Jail, oversaw the design and installation of this great clock with the reluctant help of the librarian Serena Blackwood. She might have refused outright if she had known how he intended to reuse the horologist's techniques for his so-called condignator. An inscription on the greatest wheel reads, "Strike the hours." Ava's treasury, Ava de Wolf, last of the Brandkrugs, discusses the occult and aesthetic properties of jewels and other precious minerals. Black nephrite and scolecite for nowhere, orichalc and amber for Ys, amethyst for the night key of the spider door. Ava points out, bitterly, that there is no shortage of uplifting parables and proverbs about the saving graces of a flaw in a jewel, but that no one, not jeweler nor priest nor hour, has ever found a way to repair such a flaw. Key of Night, the deliberations leading to a manifesto of the Worms of Escale as recorded around 1900 in the Bar Vienna in the cellar of the Hotel Ciervo in Noon. The Worms, all of whom use grandiose nom de guerre like Citizen Knife and the Midnight Pilgrim, agree that all previous iterations of their movement have been feckless and treacherous, and agree that the return of the pre-human hours, the gods from stone, is the true way to end the tyranny of eternity. The Worms identify the wheel, the tide, the flint, Sulochana, the spider door, the excellency Nathobasis, and Wickel indistinguishable as the 7 necessary pentiments that must be returned to every history through the propaganda of the deed. This is an eccentric list and clearly a compromise. The process of thrashing it out clearly exhausts all the participants who don't specify the necessary deed beyond a vague reference to the loopholes. The messenger awaiting her destination. The Limian Burzgash records his prophecies of a city unbuilt and entreaties to its herald. The herald may never arrive at the city unbuilt. The city may never be built without the herald's message. The herald is finally identified as the 12th initiate of the House of Silence. The foundation stone will be taken from the House of Silence, Burzgash suggests, to become the foundation stone of the city unbuilt. Serenity of the Black Wood, an allegorical history of the House of Leith, which it is here implied was inspired by the centipede. Serrano Blackwood is an occult alias to this day. The proverbial Footloose gathers the travelers in the wood and leads them through, but abandons them part way. They find themselves beset by glorious monsters. The travelers discover that they can survive if they close their eyes. They adopt a closed eye as their sign, and that they can go unnoticed if they drink from the clear, cold streams. They never forget that proverbial Footloose, the centipede, but they never forgive her either. Okay, so I'm going to get a batch of other books that sort of touch on this last set of topics. So, again, I've got an incomplete list based on some of the other playthroughs, but I'll get over it. I think I'm out of the language that I need for one of these. All right, sorry, got sidetracked. I keep shifting around the books. I sometimes misplace some of them. This is Origins the Hours. It's here somewhere. Oh, here we go. Few scene. So, Ordo Lamea. I should also be reading the Ivory. I have the Ivory and the Iron, but I think I'm missing the Silver book. But obviously that takes... Sorry, a friend of mine just told me they tried to set up two-factor authentication for Steam, and this was me encouraging them to do so. But yeah, I think I gave them a frustrating experience, and I feel slightly bad about that. Okay. So yeah, I'd like to read the Iron and Ivory book. I don't even, actually, come to think of it, I don't even know if there is a silver book. I'll think about that later. I don't know why I keep coming back to the Origin of Hours, because it was in the Memory of Gods I was looking for. I don't think I've read Barrowchild Elegies this round, though, so let's do that one. Obviously, if I'm reading the one Barrowchild book, it makes sense to read the other. I feel like there's another big one that I'm missing. Sorry for the silence, I feel like if I see the abbreviation, I'll remember it. Okay, I'm willing to guess here this was something in the playthrough, the YouTube playthrough that I'm thinking of. Road to Janus, I seem to recall, had a reference that I was interested in. But that needs Vac. Okay, so Road to Janus, Iron Book. Oh, on Imperfections, I think was one I was interested in. Okay, so there's two more on top of the ones that I'm already looking for. Let me just go about this in an ordered way. This is also a chance for me to do a little bit of an idiot check to make sure that I'm not missing any... I'm not missing any of the obvious ones. Right. This is Callicite Supplicant. Nope, Wonderful Shape. Okay, Snare of the Tree is not the one I'm looking for. Yeah, I think I'm being overly cautious here, but yeah, okay, Black Ellie. Okay, I'm feeling reasonably good about where I'm at with these, so I'm going to read... There was one of the Stolen Reflections. It's like the... but the Obliviates are known for their slanders. I think it was Stolen Reflections. Pretty sure this is it. Sorry, I'm just checking in on my friend with their Steam. Okay. So yeah, obviously we're using up all the desks, so I'll write the letters once those are done. The good news here is that we have a very small subset for me to work with. So sorry, there was a VAC text I was interested in, and I've completely forgotten it now. Road to Janus. This one. So Road to Janus, and then... We've got the Ivory book here, we've got the Iron book here, and unless I somehow magically find the Silver book, and it turns out I had it all along, I think that's it. I also suspect my attention is probably giving you a really good idea of where I'm currently thinking about this history. The fact that I'm digging into the House of Leith and such, I'm leaning towards the history where I build the City Unbuilt in Noon. Okay, on Matthias and the Amethyst Imago, Loss, an account of an occult romance. A certain Para, son of Aaron, claims to have written this in a single night as part of his initiation into the Damascene branch of the House of Leith, that order of immortals who rejected their past and future. I do find this one is kind of interesting because of the depictions, right? The cutting the parts which hold the man's seed, specifically for the Damascene branch. The laws of the house forbade Matthias to love, the customs of the wood forbade the Imago to remain, so he conjured her a final time when she had uncovered the shears of Alcapura, and she suffered him to cut the wings from her back so that she might remain, and he suffered her to cut the parts which hold man's seed to keep them from the detestable act. This was love in all its blood and joy. We have cast out Matthias from the house. In the cradle of the roots, Matthias and the Imago left their names, and though their names were lost, they found their name-day riddles. This we recall in Solution and Separation, so that in the presence of the moth, our memories may become our futures. Do this wisely, in memory of the name and the long who gave up their past, that they might be together forgotten. On Matthias and the Amethyst Imago, Pursuit. An account of an occult romance. A certain Mech claims to have written this in a single night as part of his initiation into the Theban branch of the House of Leith, that order of immortals who use the arts of water to conceal themselves. Again, I think this is a Noon reference. Matthias defied us to hunt the names of the moth and the wood to populate his pin collection. The Amethyst Imago had dallied with the witch and sister, but she'd returned to the wood to plead the moth's pardon. The moth, as a whim or a penance, sent her out to lure the Long to a slough of nightmares. Matthias loved the Imago. Did he? Can Long love, or has that organ of their soul desiccated beyond repair? The Imago loved Matthias. Did she, or did she only enact a whim? He pursued her through the wood, but at last she turned aside from the nightmare slough, and they lay together where the bounds grow bright. So they learnt the Grail's pleasures, and this is the lore they won. The Damascene traditions of the House of Leith. The House of Leith was an order of immortals who sought obscurity, rejecting their past and future. If the author of this short text is to be believed, the initiates of the Damascene branch were much more radical than their fellows elsewhere. The house generally forbade any potentially procreative activities for fear of the terrible consequences of too long bearing a child. The Damascene order took this much further. At one point, male initiates were required to undergo castration, and female initiates to strangle any children they had previously borne. These measures were so horrific that the order was shaken by repeated schisms, and eventually absorbed into the local Sisterhood of the Knot as a society of healers and exorcists. Those indignities perpetrated by the deceitful fraternity of Obliviates. It's not clear whether CROD, who is identified only by his initials, was in fact an initiate of the Obliviate Order of Immortal Adepts. He wrote in the 16th century, after the order, if he is to be believed, had passed the height of its power. 58. That they did claim inheritance from the traditions of the House of Leith, but that they have disregarded both its most sacred and most beautiful ceremonies where they are not found convenient. 59. 71. The Glassfinger toxin is no mere assassin's convenience for the Oblividiots to confine to the disposal of their enemies. It has higher uses. Certainly it is a great matter of winter, but I have already outlined the technique by which it may be fitted for its ultimate destiny. In Memory of Gods, the Barrowchild, a nameless Gaulish adept who joined an organization identified as the Ordo Lamea, writes regretfully of the destruction of the gods who were stone, the hours who preceded humanity. The Barrowchild singles out the Scarred Tribune, the Red Grail, the Forge, and the Moth for a special condemnation as murderers of the first gods. We live in the shadow of their crime, she writes, and we must evade it or repeat it. The Barrowchild describes how the Grail drained the hour called Tide, how Moth usurped the wheel from within, stealing its skin, and how the Forge first eclipsed then shattered Flint. Perhaps these are glories, she observes, but then it cannot be that glory is merciful. On the matter and deeds of serpents, this was probably the prophecies of the Naga rendered into English and illustrated by William Midnight in Paris in the 1880s, but it shows a number of divergences from that text. It's certainly quite recent by the standards of that texts. The serpent folk, called the Great Hooded Princes, came to know the order called the House of Leith and warred across the miles with them. They made an alliance with the Mother of Ants, whose children they had been. The text describes how the Great Hooded Princes escaped, or will escape, from the Fifth History where they had died, or were doomed to die. They engaged in a secret conquest of the land of the Great River, called India in some histories, and have ensured that all other conquests of that land are false conquests. The Barrowchild's Elegies. The Barrowchild, a Gaulish adept who won a place in the ranks of the Order Lamea, enumerates the great shadows laid to rest in tombs of power and discusses their various conditions. The Barrowchild identifies numerous modes that are neither true death nor true life: the vitrification of the heart, the corrupt light of the wood, chorostasis, the wandering of the fet. The Barrowchild warns particularly of the avidity of tryst, where a remnant shadow's longing for change survives its sense of self and even devours its wist. That longing may draw the curious into the tomb where the remnant shadow changes so that it cannot be distinguished from its visitor, or that the reverse becomes true, and that it is never again possible to say whether it is the shadow or the visitor that exits the tomb. Obviously here I'm getting connections to the group, but it's more about the individuals. But I wanted to at least acknowledge any texts that had these mentions. And of course, sometimes I just need the refresher as to the contents of the book. On imperfections, Pomander, Lightsmith, and Lantern Long describes the process of transinhabitation, which he calls a manifestation of imperfection. Lantern Long lack bodies, and so cannot normally leave the mansis, but they can steady glint in the physical world by establishing a road of glass. Pomander notes with disgust that the Order of Long called the Obliviates refer to it as scrining, which he considers a debased term. Pomander explains the benefits of transinhabitation, that a Lantern Long can affect the senses and thoughts of those nearby, that they can even enter their spirits, and that they can employ the senses of those inhabited to experience again the scent of blossom and season. This seems to be what interests him the most. He insists that a Lantern Long should only ever inhabit a mirror of silver, not silvered glass, but he declines to explain why. And The Locksmith's Dreams, Stolen Reflections, the fourth volume of Teresa Galmier's expansive work, no longer a discussion on the dreams of artisans, but a valuable survey of other works. The tone is calmer than that of Trespasses, but occasionally fearful, even paranoid. This volume was published in 1926, but almost immediately recalled and pulped by the publisher, at the request of the author, or possibly the authorities, depending on which story you believe. A few copies survive. Janus is the gatekeeper, the twin god, the god that wounds, the presager of changes, the sun, the moon. So we identify him with the Watchmans, the twins, with the mother, with the forge, with the Menascate, and the Madrigad. He cannot be all of these, can he? The Flamines knew the church, knew the dry land, knew Elagabalus. Is he then Synthesis, or is he something else? In Galatea they called him Aeneas Lamius, but the Obliviots are notorious for their slanders. I want to just double check here. So one of the things I always thought was kind of interesting about Janus, so he says here, we identify him with the Watchmen, the twins, with the mother, with the forge, with the Menascate, and the Madrigad. What I always found really interesting on this was from that section we read from Fasti and this idea of Janus sitting at thresholds and looking both ways. These are terms that definitely lend themselves to the horned axe. Now, I think it's probably an oversimplification to just say that the horned axe is Janus or the other way around, but definitely there's a lot of similarities being connected. And I guess the thing that's kind of fun here is when they actually do talk about him being the gatekeeper, and some of these other things here, it's the one thing that isn't actually mentioned in this list. Anyways, Janus has, they say, not one face but two, to which I reply, why only one? Why only two? Hersalt and Coseley, according to Thomas Love Denman, once agreed that Janus was all the gods and none, but later Hersalt described him as all the gods, and Coseley favored none. Denman was a sinister dilettante, but this rings true of them both. Okay. So here I'm going to start writing invitations in addition to my investigations, but here we're going to have to do 2 more rounds. One for Road to Janus. I've also heard Janus, which I guess probably might make more sense in Latin. I've never, I don't know how to properly pronounce most Latin, but all right, let's do the Iron Book first. Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to find my. I've written a lot of notes today, so I'm trying to find my. All right, here we go. So spring, we were going to invite Aaron Peel, Father Stanislav John Schaller, Douglas, Margot Matatine, and again. Oh, 2 legions in 1 meal. I hope we survive. Sorry, still helping my friend with his computer. Okay, let's get these invitations down. So we're going to want a... All right. We'll do it here. Let's get the big moon. The hell is this? going to take a screenshot of this one. Request Peel's presence. So Schaler's next. He needs nectar. I think we can get a moth and nectar, though. Writes the roots, right? Yeah. Douglas Moore, Lantern's an easy one for that. I can never remember what it takes for Margot. Sky, is it? No, I think Sky is how she... Right. Wait a minute. Am I getting this wrong? Okay, so Peter Ecdistis, Ibn Aladim, Arthur Moore, Peel, Azita, Lalakaima, Connie, Coquille, Corso, Daymare, Douglas Moore, Eason Feckery, Strathcoyne, Morgan. Oh, right. No. I'm being dumb. All right. How do I mix resurgences and emergences? Sorry, my friend's setting up their PC and they're still relatively new to it, so I just want to make sure they're not feeling too lost on this stuff. All right, I think that should set it aside for now. So the final guest, I want to try and make it Echidna, but that's going to require Coil and Chasm. So the Legion Echidna prowls the empty spaces, walk on the moor, and invoke Echidna with sufficient authority to be credible. You'll need this skill, a soul card, an offering of serpent milk, and a total of 7 scale. And of course, I don't know what Echidna eats other than babies. But let's at least get the basics prepared, and then I should actually probably make another Perenculate so that I can turn that into serpent milk. Okay, so Peel's gonna want moon food and drink. I should just write this down. Schaler's gonna want heart. Douglas is gonna want lantern. Margot's gonna want sky. Okay, so moon, heart, lantern, and sky, and then a question mark for Echidna. So I think we should be okay with what we've already got here. Let's see what we've got. Okay, so scrambled egg is our Sky Dish. So that's the first course taken care of. The lantern's probably going to be the tough one, so let's see what we've got here. Excuse me. Nope, there's the Cornish honey cake. So that's the pudding taken care of. So now I just need a main. Sorry. A moon and a heart for a main and a side. Sorry. So there's a few options there, but I want to go through all the all that I've got. I was also trying to clear this out at some point. Okay, let's do the leeks. Wait, leek soup's a starter, not a side. I think I'm running short on... Okay, Yorkshire pudding is the... side dish. A little weird to have Yorkshire pudding and Stargazy pie. You're kidding me. That's I'm just gonna live with that. All right, so then we need moon, heart, lantern, and sky for drinks. Well, the moon and the heart are handled by the water, so we'll draw some of that up. And then the lantern's covered by the tea. Oop, sorry, looks like there's a problem. Okay. Sorry, I need to figure out what I'm doing for sky. I guess the blue crown tea is the option there. I really should just use what I already have, but let me just first I'm going to double check that I don't have any other pots sneaking around. Doesn't look like it. Mind you, I always tend to sneak them in weird little places. I think I'll brew one in the kitchen. Okay, so that's 1 glass of water for the salon. And then we've got Douglas's lantern tea. Which I will also put over the fireplace. Sorry, I'm just going to let my friend know that I'm currently streaming. All right, sorry about that. And the exception, thank you very much for your truly preposterous streak of streaming. Thank you very much for that. It's always a delight to see you. It always feels like it's either early in the month or late in the month. It's always a nice little pick-me-up, especially when I'm feeling like a failure as a broadcaster. I hope you're doing very well. Thank you for giving me a boost on a overly long stream. I know I'm hitting kind of the normal stream time, but we actually got started on time today, so what do I want to do? Yes, sorry, there is one thing I wanted to try, which was to examine the Atlantic Amber. Analyze the substance, nothing will remain. Yeah, I'm a little chilly right now, actually, but that's just because of the weather. I had a pretty decent day at work, too, so that's hard to complain about. So we're going to have to wait on the Blue Crown tea, but other than that, we're good to go. Alright, so we have one more book to read. So, The Road to Janus, the Limian Burzgash, makes a series of prophecies regarding the initiates of the House of Silence, with intricate, if unhelpful, predictions on their passage through the house. The 6th initiate is Priest and Key, Gate and Church. He shall cross the sea and open the tide. He shall not be the 11th, yet there shall be 7 between them. In the first year of his time, the flower door is opened. The 12th initiate is Salvation and Rack, Steed and Rider, who chooseth 1 blossom of 3, who casteth away the key, and to whom the key shall not cast away, who comes after flame and before the snow. So why did I think this was... Oh, right, because it's Burzgash, right. The Iron Book, a manual of the Ordo Lamea, an order of quasi-immortals who maintained a secret enclave at the source of the river Limia in the Roman province of Hispania Gallicaea. This manual was compiled by one Milari Yivni, who claims to have traveled to join the Ordo from the crossroads of the waters. Members of the Ordo took an oath, the Iron Chain, that required them to remain hidden from the world. This manual includes presumably long obsolete addresses and passphrases that could be used to find the Ordo's contact in the town of Iria. The final part of the manual describes the punishments for Ordo members who break their oath of secrecy. This includes an invocation used to summon the spirit called King Crucible as an agent of vengeance. Yivni cautions that this must be a last resort when an oathbreaker would otherwise go unpunished. Summoning King Crucible might draw the personal attention of the Forge of Days. A marginal note suggests, in any case, that King Crucible, in a most transcendent sulk of sulks, no longer leaves the Mansus. Okay, so we'll use Ava's desk to get the last book. I mean, we may read books to level up lessons, but this is the last of my research. Also, it is high time I make the... Oh god, how do I even do this? Oh yeah, no, that'll work. Brinculate. Brew a notoriously deadly ink of power. Disciplines of the Scar with scholar level edge plus leaf creates Brinculate. Kind of want more coffee, but that would be a bad idea at this hour. The tree, the sea, and nothing. Okay, I should probably also make orichalcum. Here's what I'll do for that. We'll take the shaft. Maybe it's Lockwork and Clockworks that I'm looking for. Yeah, so I need glass for Gervinite, so that's a good use of the sand. And then I'll use that to make orichalcum. So what I'm doing here, because Ys is associated with orichalcum and amber, I wanted to take a look and see if studying orichalcum and amber would give me something, just something to go on. I wasn't expecting a whole lot, but it was something I wanted to sort of get off the to-do list. All right, make Blue Crown tea, a hot drink with winter sky and nectar. Blue Crown tea, always served cold, more accurate to say inevitably served cold. So one of these goes up to the room that will host the salon in. Figure I might as well pour the other one for later use somewhere else. Did I already drop the water? Losing track of what I've been up to. No, it's got a few more seconds. Okay, so yeah, other than not knowing what Echidna will eat or drink, well, eat and drink, I think we're okay. I mean, I can make a guess about the scale, but why guess? We have enough stuff running around that we should be able to feed a new guest. The Ivory Book, a manual of the Ordo Limea, an order of quasi-immortals who maintained a secret enclave at the source of the river Limia in the Roman province of Hispania Gallicaea. This manual was compiled by one Kurenai, who claims to have fled the tyranny of the Chrysanthemum throne to cross the world and join the Ordo. Members of the Ordo took an oath, the ivory chain, not to have commerce with the Hours. Followed literally, this would be almost impossible for an adept, so the manual contains numerous clarifications, exceptions, and processes of indulgence. Kurenai describes the Order's burial rites, which include spells to ensure, in theory, that the souls of dead long are not given to the Hours. The Hour called the Ivory Dove, who memorializes and commemorates, is to be invoked in secret in these rites, for with that Hour we have made an understanding. Just 1 second. Alright, so that is the last of my investigations. What we're going to do tomorrow morning, actually I guess it depends on who arrives. As if we don't have someone who's one of my intended guests, I think I'll try and summon Echidna at the moor. If it is a guest who... If it's somebody who would normally be a guest, we'll let them take care of their interests, and then we'll do the salon the next day. I don't even know where I want to keep this. Put you on the... You know, someone might drink it. That would be hilarious. Alright, so with keeper level knock, Gervanite is an essential ingredient of a Chronsicord. So this is more about just having something that counts as metal to turn into wire. And at this point, we can speed things up. So I think this will be the last day for the stream. I think we've got enough done. I would like to try and get a salon done though, so we'll see how it goes. Okay, yearly stipend. The yearly stipend from St. Ronwin's has arrived, along with the usual rather sniffy reminder that I should spend it wisely. Oh right, I just messed with the order. £7 notes. Swirls and curlicues in solemn hues. Until recently, one could exchange banknotes for gold in the banks of the capital. A £7 note can still be exchanged for rarer metals in rarer places. Okay, so let's impose order again. Actually, this isn't too bad. In the interests of making some progress, let's move on the Perenculate. I need to put a little bit more in if I want to get the... Oh no, we can just use the hail. You're joking! Ah, that's frustrating. Okay, can we put you in here? No. Maybe the foundry then? Yep, that works. That doesn't work because then I don't have something for fuel. I wonder if... No, that doesn't work at all. I think probably it's the Hall of Voices that... that actually has some nice potential, now that I think of it. So if I take the Perenculate here... Oh, wait a minute. I thought I was onto something. Alright. I think I'm just going to have to accept I can't get everything that I want. So we'll chuck a higher level Arab at it. We'll make the serpent milk. And we'll do the same with the... Now this shouldn't require special treatment. Wrong one. Maybe glass blowing vessel. Yes, there we go. Craft wire or calcum. Use this metal as a base for the Fable Forge alloy called orichalcum. Again, that's purely exploratory. And I think at this point we can speed it up to see who's going to visit. Oh, actually, I can also make a little bit of money at the Sweet Bones, seeing as we're don't have that much change. Dr. Serena Blackwood, one-time librarian of Hush House, one-time librarian of the Invisible Serapeum in Alexandria, and currently what exactly? Serena is close-mouthed, but I know that she has worked on with the St. Ronwen Trust. Okay, so Serena Blackwood is not one of the guests that I had intended, so let's bring... Okay, so if I add a health here... Yep, so now I need the serpent milk. I should have more than one. Yep. Invite Echidna, Mother of Monsters, to Brankrug. The summoning must be performed beyond the hearing of any profane ears and far from any conceivable protection. That sounds safe. Alright. Let's also get those letters out. So I might be a little late in starting the Salon, but I can live with that. Okay, so we're on to the affair of the particular mystique. So the Suppression Bureau has a growing interest in the recent fad for unconventional, often prophetic, religious movements. No laws have been broken, nothing sinister has come to light. All these movements are comfortingly solar in nature, but there does seem to be something going on. And we are talking to Dr. Serena Blackwood, one-time librarian of Hush House, one-time librarian of the Invisible Serapeum in Alexandria. And currently, what exactly? Serena is closed-mouthed, but I know that she has worked with the St. Ronwen Trust. It's always so very strange to be back. Thank you again for taking on the place. I've been asked to look into these solar movements. I don't imagine there's anything to it, but it would do to be sure. Try a book with as much Mystery Lantern as their lantern interest. These manias have happened before, you know, these enthusiasms. In the War of the Roads, the Worm Wars, the Intercalate. I wonder how many features they share with cults of other times. Try a book with as much Mystery Lantern as their lantern interest. So the known unknown... No, sorry, there's Sunrise Awakenings was a simple one. I don't believe there's anything here. When times grow strange, people turn to religion. I think that's really all it is. Thank you for setting my mind at ease. Okay, more letters. As I used to say in my youth, the day is done and so am I, but I've earned my pay. It is spring and the landlady has served me a slice of her stargazy pie, with the pilchard heads poking cheekily through the hot crust. All right, and now we wait. Keeper level forge orichalcum can catalyze and contain the Azoth. A metal which alters its state in every age, but every age can be used to catalyze the Azoth. So I'm going to throw a whist at this to see what happens. Analyze the substance, nothing will remain. And I do want to restore the Grail, or the Arab at some point, but I'll worry about that later. I pour the milk in a wide circle and watch as it sinks into the scabbed earth. Serpent eyes glint from the gorse. The wind rises to a hissing shriek. Rain rattles from the sky. I have attracted someone's attention. Echidna is Oh, 6 minutes. Damn it! Well, at least she'll be in time for the next meal. There is a sunset song which tells how in sea-stolen Ys all the water ewers were orichalcum, and all the window panes were amber. So, this did have a Ys connection, as expected. Okay, so I know better than to collect all the points. The results from the affair of the particular mystique. Yvette, Dr. Southey, refused the blandishments of the cult called the Ivory Dawn, but suspected that they honored her by reason of a pre-immortal in her ancestry. It wasn't clear what Zachary Wakefield intended with the new crop of cults, but it was clear that it was nothing especially constructive. Lieutenant Moore dared to hope that he might begin to understand the Sun's plan. Fraser Strathcoyne believed that something had drawn the Obliviots, the long who'd secluded themselves in Port Noon, back to the world. Corso suggested that new doctrines had suggested a connection to him between the enigmatic hour called the Chandler and a name of the watchman, Sunset Celia, and Dr. Blackwood dismissed the whole business of cults as a popular delusion in a time of change. So obviously I don't need to restore the Arab now because we'll use that tomorrow. I'll wait till sundown before I send everyone to bed. Night has fallen, dawn will come soon. Alright, so Margot can go to the Severn Chamber. Peel can stay in the maybe guest lodge. Nope. Schaller can though. I need a moon room. You know, I think I might have given... I think this might have been a... Or... No, what am I saying? Yeah, no, I think I might have just given away Peel's bed. This'll work. And lantern, how do I fit you in here, Douglas? Okay, so that one won't work. I don't imagine this one will. Oh! Right, because he has the heart interest as well. Okay, so how long do we need to wait for my guests? 2 minutes. Okay, so everybody's going to arrive roughly around the same time. That's good. Sorry to just kind of crash through all of this stuff, but I did want to get a salon done before the end of the night. My visitor grows impatient. Okay, so Schaller's the only one inspired. Mrs. E. Mrs. E is unsociable. Visitors marked as unsociable are wary of other visitors. They won't attend the usual kind of salon. The self-styled Mother of Monsters, a cheery tubby woman in a gray-green garment like a baggy dirndl. All right. Talk about... Let's give her a book. She's not interested in books. Let's give her a book anyway. The Wound Wounds. Let's see what happens when I do that. Medusa's Lament would actually be kind of funny too. Okay, I'm actually tempted now. What does Medusa's Lament give us? It's here somewhere. Actually, that doesn't work because that's Fushine scene. Although I seem to recall there was a story about the milk thief. God, which one of these was it? No, this was it. Medusa's Lament. Okay, so I think fair to say we don't really have anything to do with Echidna. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get Denzil so that we can still have a salon. We will employ our health to do that. Denzil will talk about practical matters, though he prefers to sit in silence. A shilling will buy his help for a day. That also means we can put any old food and drink in place. Invite Denzil up to Hush House. Denzil inclines his head in thanks. Denzil has sent a gift ahead. Okay, so let's pick... do mushroom and potato bake. Callers, or well, we can read this when we do the salon. This is not an easy table. You're kidding me, come on. Alright, and then I think probably we'll just use the next blue crown. We should have already poured that out. Yeah. This also lets me experiment with the idea that the villagers will actually accept anything. Okay, Denzil visiting. Yes, okay, we're good to go. So, we are inviting Mademoiselle Margot Matutine, a socialite yachtswoman, and under the name Morgan, an Alucite, Elysian. The former means, among other things, that she eats people. The latter means, among other things, that she is not to be taken lightly. Dr. Aaron Peel, exile, riddlemonger, thunderskin devotee, I'd rather say confidant, impeccably dressed, but always in dark clothing so the stains don't show. Dark the dressings too, at his ankles and his wrists. I won't take a seat. It's kind of you to offer. It would be unkind of me to accept. Father Stanislav John Schaller, priest, diplomat, gardener, a soft-voiced man with a very steady gaze. Detective Illuminate Douglas Moore, Detective Illuminate of the Suppression Bureau, a stoic but weary fellow. His dearest wish is to move to Chingford to grow roses, but the buggers won't let him retire. And Denzil will attend the next salon in his cleanest clothes. They will be enjoying stargazy pie. We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. Wild Lady Windermere's fan. Yorkshire pudding, eggy, creamy, crispy, and the eternal supporting character in a Sunday roast. To the similarly eternal confusion of English speakers who are not British, Yorkshire pudding is not sweet and cannot be served for the pudding course. Oh, that's a shame. They didn't. They had a couple of other notes where it's like welcome, or maybe it's after you make them. But there was a couple more references to England on this. Scrambled egg with bacon. Scrambled eggs were the breakfast of empire. In these less hegemonic times, empire is optional, as is bacon. A mushroom and potato bake. Callers tried out a variation of this as Cucurbit prison fare. It was tasty, but allegedly he was also interested in the connection between the modulation of the taste of mushrooms and the suppression of the crown growth. And Cornish honey cake. Under no circumstances should this ever be confused with Devonshire honey cake, which everyone in Brankrug could instantly identify as an inferior variation. I guess take their places for lunch. Lunch and supper last longer than less formal salons, allowing you an extra interaction between your guests. Say something witty. Oh, actually, sorry. Before I do this, there's another thing I should have done for my list. I wanted to write down what people's interests were. So, Grail and Sky. Peel is Moon and Moth. Schaller is Heart and Nectar. And more. Lantern and Heart. How's it going, Revive Snow? I'm going quite a bit later than usual. For those of you who don't know, Revive Snow is a wonderful and fellow Canadian broadcaster. Does voiceless, camless cast. Really, actually, does a very good job of staying engaging, despite the lack of those usual methods for communication. But I've lately really enjoyed their the VR streams. I think it's just mostly because the VTuber avatar that they use actually works really well with that style. But overall, I've actually seen a lot of interesting games. I'm curious with your rhythm interests if you have any interest in Rift of the Necrodancer that will be coming out soon. But anyways, someone I really like watching, somebody I tend to host later in the evening, and somebody, I don't know, usually you'll find me hanging out there if I'm not online here. But it's really good to see you. How are you doing tonight? All right, I'm going to say something witty. Douglas has been looking into the 6 centuries past death of Abbess Nona. He's questioned unspecified sources that he doesn't share with Stanislav and concludes that Nona was possessed by a name of the Blackbone and put down by her sistren. Nasty business, but best thing for it. He and Stanislav discuss the herb mixtures that might have laid her open to that possession. Another Shapt card. Denzel gives Stanislav what advice he can muster on warding off rust. A more sober tone, add a Faust card. I'm too much of a troll to like. I like Faust a whole lot, but I think most people will say conversations with me do not count as a more sober tone. Yes, Revive Snow. It's definitely been the big topic among a number of people. I follow a lot of news quite a bit. I try not to bring it up too much on my own, just because I know some people hang out to avoid it. But I don't mind talking about it when other people bring it up. I don't even know like if they're implementing it at exactly midnight or what's going on, but I don't know. I'm gonna. You already went out and bought toilet paper and it turns into currency. Yeah, this is the big one for me. So like, it is clearly better if that doesn't happen. I'm actually going to go so far as to say I don't even think they really have thought this through. But I think the other thing is that there's a lot, like the one thing that is true about this is that it just takes all the attention, right? Like, I know because you and I live in the same province, we have one election underway and we're about to have another election happening. We just had a major report about election interference come out. And like there's a current leadership contest going on right now to decide who's going to be the next prime minister of the country, even if it's just for a short period of time. Any one of these would be really big news stories. But of course, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the Americans. And I think the one thing that's helpful for people to remember is it would be better if the tariffs don't come into place. But I also think because like all of the narrative has really been focused on what the president has been saying and this idea that somehow Canada will become a failed state with the tariffs. And the other thing to remember about this is that like it will be very bad for employment. It could even push the country into a recession. But it is also not the end of Canada as we know it. There is a reason why we are trying to avoid it, and any economist can tell you that protectionism is a bad thing. But I also I like, so it's one of these things where we should take it seriously, and we should expect our political leaders to take it seriously and have a plan, because there are better and worse ways of dealing with this. But it's also important to remember that, you know, Canada has continued to operate as an independent state when tariffs were somewhere around like 40 and 50%. You know, it's a more modern thing that it's been down. And again, the reason why it's down is because it's basically a better allocation of resources, right? We're able to import, you know, like computers and services and things like that from the States, and they tend to buy our raw materials. And of course, with a breakdown of that, you know, less trade from us, which would lower our GDP. And then, of course, we'll do retaliatory tariffs, because you can't just let that stuff sit by. But of course, you and I pay those retaliatory tariffs. But yeah, I mean, it's one of these things, you know, I'm not in a position to tell the Americans who they should vote for, right? I get annoyed when the Americans tell me who I should vote for. I'm not in a place to tell them, you know, shame on you for doing this. I have my feelings about the state of the world. I have my feelings about who was chosen, but I have to live in the world as it is, not as I would like it to be. And, you know, as a consequence, you know, the U.S. are our allies. We've had tussles with them before. I'm not I'm not happy about it. I don't think anybody's going to be happy about it. I really hope we get past this sort of nonsense sooner rather than later. But you know, you get to choose your reactions to things. You don't necessarily get to choose what the other person does. And one of the most healthy things, I think, is that, like, I don't think just ignoring things is the right answer. but I do definitely feel that, especially with like breaking news stuff, like you do not need to follow every single headline. But with that in mind too, right? Like with the prospect of some kind of recession coming up, it also definitely does not hurt to like be mindful, right? So if you don't have an emergency fund, like don't buy music like I just did, you know, or if you, you know, if you feel that you're in a somewhat precarious position in your job, you know, prepare for a negative eventuality. You don't wish for it. Obviously, I hope everybody gets through this without too much hardship. But it's one of these cases here, right? Like if you see the economic indicators going down, you know, unemployment's going up, you know, productivity's going down and things like that. You know, you do what you can to take care of yourself. But it's one of these things, right? You always want to steer that ship between, you know, it's not the end of this country that we've come to love, but it's also not like, oh yeah, nothing's gonna happen. It's more like, this is gonna suck, but we don't, like, the antagonists in this case definitely want people to feel like they don't have options, they don't have power, they don't have things that they can do. That's clearly not true. I think probably there's actually on the CBC there was a panel, I'm trying to remember the name. I think she used to be a Quebec NDP MP. Why can't I remember her name? Older woman. But she had a really good point, which was like, you know, we've been here before with the states under the previous, not the previous administration, but the current holder of that office, in the first round. They said, and they signed a trade agreement, and they didn't do it because they said, oh, won't that be good for Canada, right? They did that because that was in their interests. And very little has actually changed in that regard. So again, crazy people can definitely cause harm, and we want to minimize that harm. But I don't know. I also don't necessarily think it's a point where, like, I take the time to talk about this because I got a coffee before I went home. So I had to work somewhere different today, just because I was meeting with somebody. And a great meeting. Took a bit longer than I was expecting, but some books that I'd ordered came in as well. So I picked those up, and I thought, yeah, I'll get a cup of coffee before I go home. And apparently, the owner knows me reasonably well. And apparently it was like the only thing people were talking about all day in the cafe. You know, we were talking about Obsidian Games before. Have any of you played Tyranny? I'm going to unpause while I wait for the answer to that, but I'm curious if anybody has seen that game. Exalted Debates. Denzel and Douglas are complaining amicably about the recent decline in the quality of their preferred pipe tobacco. Okay. So one of the interesting implications in Tyranny is the tyrant is the one who casts spells known as edicts. And I didn't get very far in it, but there seemed to be an implication that the edicts worked partly because the people in the region thought they worked. And I like that idea, both as a magic system, but also as a way to think about this stuff, right? There are people, it's by the same people who did Pillars of Eternity. I actually like it more than Pillars of Eternity. And I think I definitely think there is something useful. Like, obviously, like I really like video games, and I particularly like video games like Book of Hours, because they allow me to talk about real world subjects in an interesting way. Like, this is one of the things that I really love about the Secret History setting, is that, you know, you can see real life things in a slightly more colorful and interesting way. I kid you not, when I saw the logo of where I was working for the first time, it actually looks like a reference to two aspects in the Secret Histories. Like, I almost laughed out loud when I first came into work, when I saw that. And like, that's just one of those things where you know, you're part of the secret society, you play this game, and if you know, you know. And that's something wonderful about it. But it's also important to remember, right? I feel like this comes up a lot on Twitter, is that video game solutions are very often not real world solutions. So, as with good stories, you can learn a little bit about the world and you can think about the world in different ways, but you don't want that to become your instruction manual for how you deal with the world. So one thing that's always kind of bothered me, this is going to be one that annoys people a bit, and I'm sorry about that, but I told a story about how I was in a chat and I shared this is a Discord chat, and I shared an article that I wrote, and because I used as a teaser image for it on Twitter, was an AI generated image, and this basically resulted in a wall of text talking about how bad that image was and so on and so forth. No comment on the article itself. And again, the usual things like, you know, no prohibitions against AI art or anything like that. It's just that guy had that axe to grind. And I understand that among a lot of people, the use of any kind of generative AI is controversial. People want to do some kind of, you know, creative work on their own, and they see these tools as a threat, and theft of their work, and so on and so forth. One thing that bothers me about the reactions to people saying that they've used those tools is essentially it's effectively a boycott of the thing. And I don't feel great about that, because it feels a little bit like a stolen base, or an attempt to steal a base. Like, you know how sometimes in online debates you will see people declare someone or something as illegitimate, and there's like no real authority to do that, right? There's not the internet police to declare what is and isn't legitimate. And likewise, there's going to be a lot of very vocal people online that will tell you a game isn't good because it used some kind of generative AI. But that doesn't actually make that the case. I think one of the reasons I feel this way about it, it's funny that I say this, because I actually feel very uncomfortable with the way OpenAI has conducted itself. It really does sort of feel like they feel entitled to everybody else's work, but they very jealously guard their own outputs, right? So, like, they have a pretty interesting interpretation of intellectual property rights. But again, I kind of take this view that I live in the world in which generative AI is a thing. I also think that there are limits to what kind of IP protections people want to hold up. So like, my whole view of this is that once upon a time people were talking about how the AI isn't very good. And now it's not so much talk about how it can't make good things, but instead it's about how it's bad that they used works without permission. And I'm like, okay, well, we can accept that. But it would also mean that effectively the horizon for this tool to become legitimate is effectively the life of current authors plus 70 years, which is the copyrights side. And at that point, that's really just a question of figuring out the dollar value that needs to be paid to everyone to bring that like transfer of rights up to the modern day, right? Like that's not really a principle that holds. That's more of a delaying tactic to say, all right, well, at least I got mine, and it's the artists of the next generation that are going to have to get screwed by this thing. And I don't really have a lot of respect for that type of thinking. I think probably there's something to be said about the tool itself. And the reason why I feel a little more comfortable with a long-term perspective on these things is that if you read Plato's Phaedrus, Socrates tells sort of this story about the invention of writing. And, you know, the inventor of writing, one of the Egyptian gods, comes up and says, "Hey, look, I made writing. This is it's a tool for memory. Everybody will be able to remember things better." And, God responds, it's like, that's not a tool for remembering. That's a tool for forgetting, because people can see what's written down and they're not going to be able to, they don't have any need to remember it, so they won't do it. And the thing is, like, that criticism is actually true, right? We probably do remember fewer things than we do. We don't, like, memorize the Iliad and recite it. We read the book. But it's hard to say that writing was a bad invention. When the printing press comes out, right, for a very long time there was this tradition of being a scribe and writing these things out and creating these beautiful tomes. And in Islam, right, there was this, or at least Muslim countries, this idea that scholar's ink is more sacred than martyr's blood, or something along those lines. I may get the quote slightly incorrect, but you see the idea. And again, you can see these beautiful manuscripts written out, and Gutenberg comes along and has this printing press, and this really, you should think of it as analogous. I actually think that there's a better analogy to Gutenberg's printing press and AI than Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project and AI. Although I know people definitely put it in terms of competition between the West and China and its allies. And I don't think that's an unfair comparison, incidentally. But the thing about Gutenberg is that was very clearly a commercial enterprise. I don't even know if there was any kind of prediction about it being a massively disruptive tool. I know certainly there were feelings that scriptures shouldn't be like translated in certain languages, and there are people burned at the stake for that. But obviously, the printing press was a tool that wound up being incredibly disruptive, right? You have his news items popping up. But yeah, like you have, the Reformation, you have wars fought over that. You do have masses that wind up becoming more educated, and there are different expectations that come as a result of it. As far as a social consequences are concerned, it's a massively disruptive invention. But it's not necessarily one we would necessarily wish to go back to. If anything, we sort of speak nostalgically about a time when people would read books. So I guess the biggest thing that I can say is acknowledging that this is something that exists, and that the copyright questions are going to be handled by the courts. And actually, there have been a couple of things from a U.S. body on copyright published about AI on copyright. It's a pretty interesting read, actually. I think it's a 40-page document, but I think the conclusion they have is that purely generated AI, so you go into Copilot and you get it to generate an image, that isn't covered by copyright. But if you take that input and use it as part of the creation of something bigger, right? If you were to put it as part of a game, that is still copyrightable. And I actually think that's probably the right way to go about it, right? It's protecting the human work, but something that's just automatically generated by a machine can't be copyrighted. And that, of course, puts the incentive to the people who will be profiting from and putting investment into creating these things to make sure that there is the human as part of it, because of course that's how you obtain your intellectual property. If you completely automate the process of something, then anyone can copy it and you don't have a leg to stand on. So I actually think there are some interesting implications in terms of retaining the role of human creativity, on top of the fact that I actually happen to think that humans have an important role to play in the creation of these things. But anyways, I'm obviously going off on a big long tangent here, but the big thing for me is that I think there are, even if you are quite opposed to the use of these technologies, I think it is fair to say that there are some interesting avenues that you can go down, and that ultimately reducing it down to this is illegitimate, this is conceived in sin, and therefore I don't need to think about it, is not the right way of thinking about it, about this. I think it's a very shallow way of thinking, and it's fine. Like you don't have to use this stuff, but I don't necessarily think anything interesting is being added to the conversation if that's how it goes about. And that just sort of brings me back. This is like the last part of the Matryoshka dolls. This is kind of where I come back, where it's sometimes interesting to think about games, and they will give you analogies. They will sometimes tell you a story, and they'll sometimes give you an idea that is important. And in the case of Tyranny, it's that sometimes these edicts, sometimes these things rely entirely on kind of this collective agreement that it will happen. But there's also that danger of not applying video game thinking to solutions, right? The solution to dealing with heated rhetoric, with dealing with people behaving in a threatening way, is not just to like put your head in the sand and say, I disbelieve, but it's to take stock of the fact that they want you to think the way they think, but you have your own agency, you have your own power. And if anything, the fact that it's another country that's doing it to you should probably be the indication that when it comes time to pick your own country's leaders, you want to think very carefully about who you choose. Hopefully I didn't alienate too many people on that conversation, but feel free to submit all of your disappointment in all capital letters. Yeah, I mean, so for me, Revive Snow, it's I have tried to come up with I've tried a few different ways where I've tried to improve my writing through the use of the tools. I don't find it useful at all to get them to write for me. I like the me writing thing. I definitely could use a good editor, though. It's hard for me to get people to read my stuff in advance, and even harder to get sort of people who are in a position to sort of do a good editorial work, and to do it for free, right? Like no one owes me their time at all, right? I'm lucky to get people reading my stuff. If I have an audience of 5 people for what I write, that's a good day. So it would be nice if I could use those tools, something that's available for me at any time, any day. I can bounce ideas off of, and it'll tell me, that part's maybe a little too long, you're repeating yourself here, you can trim this back here. Maybe, did you really intend not to use a comma? This seems like a run-on sentence. Those would be wonderful, but the thing is that these tools are so servile. They really want you to keep using them. So it'll always keep talking about what a good writer I am and how well done this is and so on and so forth. And it will let some of the most embarrassing errors go by, when of course what I really need is for it to be ruthless. I need it to point out every little mistake and grammatical glitch, because sometimes you just miss this stuff because you already know it was inside your head. So yeah, if you're overly reliant on it, you are definitely not practicing a set of skills. You will not necessarily become better at some of the things that you're using to sort of skip over. But it's also fair to say that, like, we were talking about trade, and the thing is, the reason why trade is so helpful is that it allows people who are good at a certain thing to specialize in that thing, and then the other person is able to specialize in that other thing. And it's the trade that allows people to sort of maximize their use, right? Maximize that efficiency of the use of resources. So, you know, Book of Hours is created by 2 game developers working in the United Kingdom and contractors. And they've been able to make some really wonderful games at a cost considerably lower than their peers, because they've found a way to operate with a very small number of people. And I think it's true that you can probably use some of these tools. Let's say that you kind of know how to program, but you're not like a specialist. Instead of spending the time to sort of go through and sort of really uplift those skills, you can probably get a good foundation from that in. And then that allows you to maybe focus on like the story part that maybe you're good at. And then when it comes time for maybe the final version, or maybe like once you have a promising prototype and you've got a layer of investment, or even just you're like, you know what, this is fun, like I totally can turn this into a real game, that's when you hire in a specialist programmer and ask them to do the hard stuff that you weren't able to do on your own. Like, I think those are wonderful ways that you can plug the gap. But yeah, so you say, I like to write my own long messages as well, but the amount of people that I come across, even at work, who rely on ChatGPT to write everything for them is crazy. And yeah, so I mean, like, I still hang out in my university subreddit, and the number of people who are basically using, ChatGPT to do their homework assignments for them, I'm like, well, what job do you think you're going to get at the end? Like, they're like, well, prompt engineering is an important skill. They should be teaching us that. And I'm like, well, it sounds like you were able to figure that out on your own. But like, why do you think that you're going to be getting some sort of 6-figure job when you come out of university if the only skill you have demonstrated is something that I can spend $15 a month? I mean, most of the time I could do. I actually don't pay for any of those tools. I just use the free ones. But, any employer can spend like $15 a month to accomplish the exact same thing that you've demonstrated that you can do. Like, anybody who thinks that they're somehow getting an education by getting ChatGPT to do their assignments for them is just deluding themselves. The only skill that they're learning is how to lie on a resume so that they can leech off of some business, and sort of extract their little part of the profits. And that'll work. I mean, I know people like that. I know people who went to consulting firms who did not have an original thought in their head, but were really good at buddying up with people and really good at talking to hiring managers. And that works right up until you screw up. And I don't really like, I've got better things to do than see what my classmates are up to on LinkedIn. But I would be shocked if any of them were still at like Bain or something like that. I think that they washed out pretty quick. And the only reason I know that isn't even cope. Like, I'm really happy with where I am right now. I'm definitely not making as much money as they did, even later in my career now. I'm probably not making as much money as they did in their first year. But man, I love the job that I'm doing. And, the reason I feel a certain degree of, I feel a degree of certainty as to their ultimate fate is just because I had to hear them talk about stuff, right? You know, these are the sorts of people who TikTok finance influencers would look at and call them BSers. And you know, there's just a certain point where like I don't think consulting is like negative or zero value. It might be close, but these are people who are actually intelligent and know what they're doing. Like I knew someone who worked at Ernst and Young. Like these are actually, in some cases, it's at some layers, these are actually very smart and capable people. And you can only fake that for so long. So, I don't know. Anyways, obviously that was a long and wide-ranging thing. But, I mean, in the end, this stuff is, to a certain extent, this stuff is just going to sort itself out. And I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Like, maybe it is just actually, this is the rise of the machines. And, like, within a few years, you know, they will be so beyond human capability that in the end, right, like what is Microsoft's ultimate business strategy? No one can answer. Just ask Copilot. It's better than any living human. And I guess the thing is that I don't put a whole lot of thought into preparing for that, because how exactly do I prepare for that, right? Like it's kind of at the point where we all figure that out as it goes along. I wouldn't assign a very high probability to that, but you know, it's in the grand scheme of things, it's just something that there's certain points in which just the frame of reference is so outside the way we normally think of things that I just don't find a whole lot of value in worrying about it, right? It's a little bit like, again, coming back to the tariff thing, like 25% tariffs on Canadian imports. I mean, okay, I can imagine a series of events in which that actually leads to the complete collapse of Canada, and we essentially wind up like North Korea or something. But that would require a very large number of failures along the chain to create that specific circumstance that I just don't necessarily think it's productive for me to think about that eventuality. Anyways, now we're going to inject a little gaiety. Morgan disdains Denzel. He, in his turn, keeps a respectful distance and can be observed to scratch a sun cross covertly into the table when she's not looking. Instinct and emotion. Add a tryst card. This is what happens when I stream late. I get even chattier than I normally am. But hopefully that was somewhat interesting. I asked Copilot, and they gave a reasonable response that addressed innovation, security, economic sustainability, and rights. That is amusing. Morgan asked Stanislav gaily and lightly about Three Faces, the guardian of the Grove of Green Immortals, where Stanislav is reputed to have spent time. Stanislav replies respectfully, urbanely, and elliptically. Inject a little gaiety, add a core card. Douglas asks Denzel for advice on repairs to his shed, which Denzel gravely provides. The gaiety ones are quite good on this one. All right. A lively meal concludes. My guests leave happy. So we didn't have enough time to level up from the skills and such, but I'm pretty happy with how that went. So it's interesting that it doesn't say inspired, but you can clearly see that he is. And a lively salon's concluded. We have a memory satisfaction, which I should probably sleep on. A curious hunch. Of course, we already had that. Lesson door and wall. Orchids and narcotics. Oh, Fear Memory. Another door and wall. Putrefactions and calcinations. And herbs and infusions. Okay. So I think I'm going to work out exactly how I distribute these later. I think I'm going to do that at the start of the next stream. So door and wall is going to have to go to a couple of level 7 skills. Orchids and narcotics. Well, herbs and infusions is clearly a level 6 that will upgrade. Putrefactions and calcinations. I wonder if... Oh yeah, no, we can level up sand stories with that. So orchids and narcotics. That's going to have to be a 7 as well. So we're really pushing up the floor on these things. But yeah, so I think what's going to happen for the next stream, I'll work out exactly what skills, but I think we've got a pretty good idea looking at this list already. It looks like we're going to have to wait for summer for the next... I mean, we got to be getting close to the Affair of the Particular Mystique, to the end of the Affair of the Particular Mystique. Out of the characters on this list who I might be interested in turning into members of the Lighthouse Institute, we've got Hokabald, Aaron, Yvette, Zachary, and Margot. So I notice here we've got Yvette and Zachary. But yeah, I've kind of so the way I mentioned this before, where I'm leaning right now is for a history in which the city unbuilt is built in noon, based on the material that I read here. There's a couple of reasons why I like this for the magnate. But I'll wait. I'm going to wait for the actual decision time for that. Our next priority is going to be to, again, power through these events. I'm going to need at least 3 more unless we can find a way to inspire characters. And so the way I'm going to try and accelerate that is the next time we get an event, we're going to invite as many guests as have the aspects that that this event has. We're going to invite everybody with those aspects on the same day and just try and get through everyone, so that basically we do like one event a season, or maybe every 2 seasons. That may wind up being a complete catastrophe. That may not work, but I want to give it a try. And of course that also means that I'm going to have to do more leveling, because each season will bring a Salon and I don't want to waste the lessons. But I think that's a way I can kind of keep the lore going without completely abandoning, you know, any momentum. Like, basically, I can have some momentum for the playthrough, but it's not just completely putting it on hold like we had for part of today just to get through the remaining books. I think I've got a destination in terms of the history that I write, and now it's purely about the Lighthouse Institute. And that will be for a future episode. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out for an extended stream. I'm going to find who is online at this hour. I'm also kind of hungry, so maybe I'll make a snack. But let's see what's up. Oh, that's actually quite a few people. Katako is doing some more... Katako is doing some more... Oh, actually, sorry. I was going to host Catico, and I still want... I'd still like to, so I'll just do a quick shout out here. But I do see that there's actually a streamer called Kibble and Bricks who has the Canadian tag, as well as is playing Book of Hours. So I feel like it's more appropriate to host someone playing Book of Hours. So again, I haven't seen this broadcaster, but I always like to show some support to Book of Hours. So my apologies for not sending you off to Catico. But like I said, it's nice to build some community around Book of Hours and encourage more people to stream it. I will be back on Monday. I'm going to try and get some recording for the YouTube series done. I also feel like I should probably take a bit of a break, because I know I'm going to have a big surge at work soon. But that's not something you need to worry about. I will see you all on Monday. For those of you looking forward to the YouTube videos, I will see you Monday as well. Thank you very much for watching. Please treat Kibble and Bricks well, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care.